Hey there, welcome to Bread Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. This happened about a year ago, but I just read something similar, and it still sends shivers down my spine. I have 3 kids who were around 9, 7, and 2 at the time, and I'm married to my husband Marcus. We live in a small rural town outside Austin, Texas, just beyond the main village limits. Every night, I make sure all the doors are locked, and sometimes I even put the security chain across for extra protection. That particular night, I was jolted awake by violent pounding on our front door. At first, I thought it might be someone who'd had too much to drink, mistaking our house for theirs. But then I heard the doorknob rattling aggressively as someone tried to force their way in. Marcus crept close to the door while I positioned myself on the staircase, phone ready to call 911. Marcus called out firmly, "There are children sleeping in here. You need to leave immediately." The man on the other side began rambling incoherently. His speech was slurred, not heavily, but something was definitely off about his voice. He seemed either under the influence of something or mentally unstable. He kept demanding to see a woman named Rebecca, and Marcus told him clearly that no one by that name lived here and ordered him to go away. The stranger kept insisting we were hiding her, threatening that he was going to break in. During this exchange, the most disturbing sounds came from behind our door. There was heavy thumping, scratching noises, and another sound I couldn't identify. Marcus then shouted that I had already called the police. The man made several more frantic impacts against the door. Then suddenly everything went silent. We assumed he had left because there was no attempt at our neighbors' houses either. For hours, I stayed awake with a baseball bat nearby, waiting to see if he would return. Thankfully, he didn't come back. The next morning being Saturday, I decided to check outside, and honestly, what I saw made me feel sick. There was a massive dent in our door that surely couldn't have been made by just a fist. On the door and surrounding panels were fingernail scratches and dried blood. It wasn't a huge amount, but enough that it required washing off. Between our door and the garbage bins lay a shattered ceramic planter, also stained with blood, broken into countless pieces. One of our potted plants had been overturned, with soil, and the plants scattered across our porch. My best guess is that he tried to use the planter as a weapon and injured himself in the process. But that's just speculation. My blood ran cold realizing how violent and aggressive this intruder had been, especially since we had no reason to be targeted. We informed our neighbors, who were absolutely horrified. They mentioned hearing something, but assumed it was just someone drunk. When we mentioned the woman's name, Rebecca, our neighbor's face went pale. "Oh my goodness, that's the woman who used to live 3 houses down where the Johnsons live now. She was involved with drugs and knew some dangerous people." Our neighbor suspected that one of her former drug associates was searching for her. Even now, there have been several incidents at her old house requiring police intervention, though I'm not sure what for exactly. We've since installed a video doorbell and security system, so at least we have some protection now. It didn't result in anyone getting hurt, but it could have easily turned dangerous. and that thought terrifies me to this day. Hello, everyone. I'm writing this not only to share my experience, but to maybe get some insight from people who know more about the supernatural than I do. For some background, Willowbrook Manor is a 19th century estate in rural Oregon, with various legends that have earned it the title of most haunted location in the Pacific Northwest. It's open to visitors, but staying overnight requires special arrangements through historical society connections. In June 2019, my parents, my best friend Jake, and I were given the opportunity to spend the night in Willowbrook Manor during our summer road trip. We were 16 at the time. My mom's college roommate worked for the Oregon Historical Society and had connections with the tour guides. My friend and I, being young and easily impressed, had no idea about the manor's haunted reputation. My mother deliberately didn't mention the ghost stories beforehand, knowing it would terrify us. We were completely unaware of the dark history surrounding the estate. Skipping ahead to late that evening, we were settled in our room located in the mansion's east wing tower. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, without warning, a heavy, oppressive energy suddenly filled the room and seemed to press down on both of us. It's difficult to describe without sounding cliched, but it felt like impending doom. An overwhelming sense of dread that made you want to avoid looking around the room and keep your eyes fixed straight ahead. We joked nervously that the place must be haunted because we both got goosebumps from this sudden shift in atmosphere. There was no trigger that caused it. We had just been relaxing and talking. What really unsettled us was that we both felt it simultaneously. We continued watching movies on Jake's laptop, trying to ignore the feeling. It was getting late when, while staring at the screen, I became absolutely certain that something was watching me intently. Jake suddenly pointed toward the area behind an antique dresser near the entrance and told me he was getting terrible vibes from that spot and didn't want to look in that direction. The strange thing was, we could both describe this presence in exactly the same way, even though we couldn't actually see anything with our eyes. We both sensed a female figure standing in the corner of the room. We described her as having blonde or golden hair, definitely feminine energy, but carrying very negative, sad, or possibly angry emotions. We couldn't see her visually, but we knew precisely where she was positioned and what she looked like. The most disturbing part was the intense feeling of being watched by something that clearly didn't want us there. Once we acknowledged her presence and what we were sensing, Jake and I ended up huddled together in the bed because we were literally paralyzed with fear. My parents were in the master bedroom right next door. I could have easily called out to wake them, but somehow we couldn't bring ourselves to do it. We were frozen in place, nervously laughing, but desperately trying to avoid making eye contact with this invisible presence. I'm not sure if she was angry at us specifically, or just a generally tormented spirit. We both eventually fell asleep from exhaustion. We couldn't understand any clear message from her. It was just this overwhelming intuition that this young blonde woman was there with us in the room. The next morning, we packed quickly and left. Obviously, I told my parents about our night, and my mom looked very uncomfortable. What she hadn't told us was the legend of Willowbrook Manor involving a woman who lived there over a century ago and was murdered. According to the story, she was pushed from the tower window. Other sources suggest different methods of death, but her spirit supposedly never left the manor, protecting something or someone. I found very few detailed sources about this history, and I haven't heard of anyone else's similar experiences. What I'd love to know from this experience is, what are the chances this was genuine, given that we had two witnesses? Is sensing a translucent figure or receiving mental images common for human spirits? The story we knew absolutely nothing about seems to match our description perfectly. It's quite a coincidence that what we sensed aligns so closely with the Lady of Willowbrook Manor legend. My parents didn't experience anything that night. They fell asleep early and slept peacefully through the night. Although they did mention that the portrait across from their bed seemed to be giving them strange looks, as they put it. It's incredibly difficult to find substantial information about Willowbrook Manor, so maybe someone has heard of it before or has additional information, though I find that unlikely. Let me start by saying these stories are 100% real. I should also mention that I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, but these experiences are things I think about frequently, and they give me chills every single time. Buckle up, because this is going to be a long one due to all the backstory that's needed. I grew up in rural Michigan as a kid. I absolutely loved visiting my grandparents' house to do things like fish in their pond, watch old movies with my grandfather, and learn cooking from my grandmother. This house is a beautiful Victorian home still standing today, surrounded by towering oak trees and sprawling maple groves. Detroit area folks will understand that reference. It has a long, winding gravel driveway where Spanish moss hangs from century-old oak trees, and a gorgeous fishing pond off to the right side of the drive. It truly is an absolutely stunning home on the most beautiful piece of property you could imagine. The woman who originally built this house owned a small boutique shop in suburban Detroit. This woman was apparently very elegant and beautiful, and from what I've been told, she never missed an opportunity to dress up in her finest high-heeled shoes. She was married to a man who had been in a serious car accident and was severely disabled. As his medical condition deteriorated, she was forced to sell the house and downsize to pay for his mounting medical expenses. When my grandparents purchased the house from her, she was absolutely devastated about having to let it go. She was genuinely obsessed with this property. It was like her precious child. She was so attached to the house that there were multiple occasions when my grandparents would leave to run errands around town and return to find her there, peering through the windows to check on the place. Fast forward several years after she had moved out, and my grandparents were completely settled in. She was brutally murdered by a notorious Michigan serial killer who terrorized southeastern Michigan from 1992 to 2003. She was one of 8 victims in his horrific killing spree. Years later, after her tragic death, I started spending many weekends at this house, absolutely loving life and being a normal kid. I had absolutely no knowledge about the previous owner, but I always felt extremely uneasy whenever I was alone in this house. Hearing random knocking sounds and footsteps was completely normal, and my grandparents always attributed it to the old house settling. My grandmother's 2 Siamese cats, Winston and Edgar, were always around and provided some comfort when I was alone. I thought they might also be responsible for the strange noises. When my brother and I would stay over as young children, We would sleep in the master bedroom with my grandmother and the two cats. We were constantly awakened by weird sounds, and what distinctly sounded like someone walking across the hardwood floors in the hallway that connected to the walk-in closet. What makes this extremely unsettling is that in front of that closet, there were permanent high heel marks embedded into the old creaky hardwood flooring, where the previous homeowner used to get dressed and put on her shoes every morning. One particular night, I clearly remember loud knocking that was strong enough to wake me up, and one of my grandparents' cats becoming extremely agitated. The cat stood up on all fours, staring directly toward the source of the noise with all its fur standing straight up. The overwhelming feeling that someone else was in the room with us was absolutely spine-chilling and terrifying. This type of incident started happening more frequently during our visits. At this point, I began asking my grandparents serious questions because I was scared out of my mind every single night I stayed there. They acted like they had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. I'm sure they were trying not to frighten me. One afternoon, I was in the study/computer room at the front of the house, completely by myself, while everyone else was outside at the pond fishing. I was genuinely enjoying myself, working on a drawing of a blue jay that I had pulled up on the computer screen. Sitting directly next to me on the desk was a neat stack of DVD cases piled about 4 or 5 high. When I looked down to continue working on my blue jay drawing, the entire stack of cases was forcefully knocked off the desk and landed approximately 2 or 3 feet away on the floor. I simply could not believe what I had just witnessed. I jumped up and ran outside as fast as my legs could carry me. When I told this story to my grandparents, they were very skeptical and just kind of laughed it off dismissively. At this point, I was absolutely convinced that something supernatural was happening in this house. One evening, not long after that incident, while watching a movie with my grandfather, something occurred that I will never forget for the rest of my life. My grandfather had fallen asleep in his favorite recliner, producing his trademark loud snoring. Since the house was located far from any streetlights and miles from the nearest town, it became extremely dark and quiet when we turned off the lights. I continued watching the movie alone and suddenly got the most intense feeling that someone was standing right next to me, just watching me watch the television. I tried my best to ignore it, but the sensation was so powerful that it genuinely felt like someone was positioned right beside me, silently observing. The room began to feel like it was shrinking around me, getting smaller and smaller. It honestly felt like I was intruding in someone else's personal space. Eventually, from the hallway behind us, I heard distinct footsteps, as if someone was walking away wearing high-heeled shoes. It was the most bizarre thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life. To this day, I have absolutely no explanation for what occurred, and it will forever remain a mystery. Not long after that experience, my grandmother finally told us the complete story of the previous homeowner and her deep love and obsession with the house. Both of my grandparents are chemists and very scientific-minded people. So, like me, they didn't believe in supernatural phenomena. I honestly don't know what kind of energy was present in that house. We eventually stopped visiting because it frightened us beyond belief. In the summer of 2016, the house, along with most of the Detroit metropolitan area, experienced severe flooding. It received 8 feet of water throughout the entire house, destroying every wall and even portions of the ceiling. At that same time, my family's house flooded as well, so I was staying with a friend temporarily. One day, my grandmother asked if I could meet the renovation contractors at her house so they could continue their restoration work. I agreed, picked up the key from her, and arrived at the house early because I wanted to experience that supernatural energy one final time before they sold the property. I walked up to the front entrance, unlocked it, and stepped inside. To my complete and pleasant surprise, I didn't sense anything unusual at all. The house felt completely empty. All of the interior walls had been demolished, and I could see straight through the entire building from the kitchen to the back rooms. All of the creaky hardwood floors with the high heel marks had been completely torn out. All of the furniture and personal belongings were gone, leaving it completely barren. It smelled like a strong mixture of mud and fresh paint. I genuinely believe that the flood somehow washed away whatever supernatural energy had been trapped in that house when the water drained out. It's so strange because I have such a deep emotional connection to that property. I want to own it someday, even though it absolutely terrified me during my childhood. To start with, this isn't exactly my story since I was very young, but I was present for everything that happened. Most of the details come directly from my dad, who was the main person this experience affected. When I was about 8 years old, my brother was 9. Our dad had us actively involved in Boy Scouts through our local troop in Wisconsin. It was very common for our Boy Scout group to have an end-of-year camping trip. This particular year, we all camped on a local farmer's property that had a small lake where we could fish, roast marshmallows over the campfire, and do other typical Boy Scout activities. There were about 10 adults and 20-plus kids all under the age of 10 participating in this camping trip. Eventually, we all decided it was time to go to sleep. Each family went to their respective tent for the night. My dad, brother, and I all got comfortable in our large blue camping tent and prepared for bed. Keep in mind, this was in the early 2000s when having any form of smartphone was still very new and considered a luxury item for wealthy families. This definitely was not the case for our family. My dad had a very basic flip phone at the time. At around 2 or 3 in the morning, we were all suddenly awakened by what sounded like someone unzipping the entrance flap of our tent. When I first woke up, I assumed it was my dad either getting something from our car or going to use the portable restrooms, or maybe another scout leader checking on something. It turned out it definitely was not my dad, as I quickly realized when I saw him lying right next to me in his sleeping bag. The next thing I knew, an unknown woman was loudly whispering, asking if we had a cell phone she could borrow. At this point, I was so frightened that I immediately woke up my dad by shaking him. He quickly asked her what she needed, and she repeated her request for his phone. He remembers handing over his phone, thinking it might be a domestic violence situation, a stalking incident, or some other emergency. He told me later that he tried not to listen to her phone conversation because he didn't want to eavesdrop on what was happening. However, he couldn't help but overhear one thing she said that he simply couldn't ignore. She was talking on the phone and mentioned how she had just escaped from the back of a police cruiser and needed somewhere to hide immediately. This woman was actively on the run from law enforcement and was currently using my dad's phone to contact her escape accomplices. Absolutely crazy situation. As a side note, we still tease our dad about being an accomplice to this day, and he always laughs about it. After she finished her call and left our tent, my dad immediately contacted local law enforcement to report what had happened. Here's the incredible part. The police officers didn't even realize that she had escaped from their patrol vehicle. They thought she was still secured in the back seat. Again, completely insane. My dad let her go without trying to detain her, because he was primarily worried about the safety of all the children present at the campsite. But the authorities ended up recapturing her later that same night and returned to our campground to let us know they had her back in custody. The most amusing detail was that my dad recalls her holding his phone in a very strange way while she was using it. Remember, we were camping on undeveloped farmland in the middle of the night. It was completely pitch black outside. We realized much later that this woman had been wearing handcuffs the entire time. And that's why he thought she was holding her hands in such an odd position. My dad had handed a woman who was actively fleeing from police, while still in handcuffs, his cell phone, so that she could call someone to help her escape from law enforcement. In the moment, it was absolutely terrifying. But now, it's become a hilarious family story about how my dad tried to help a lady in distress and accidentally chose the wrong person to assist. Hopefully, this story made you chuckle like it always does for our family. So this happened quite a while back when I was a teenager, and some of the memories might be a bit hazy. Basically, my family used to own a golden retriever named Cooper. One evening, I took Cooper out to our backyard in our California suburb and let him run around and play for a while. I went back inside the house and was planning to bring him back in shortly after. Then my brother Tyler and I heard Cooper barking intensely from outside. He usually barks like crazy for absolutely no reason, so we weren't particularly worried about it at first. A minute or so later, I went back outside to bring him inside for the night. Normally, Cooper would never come in willingly when called. I would have to go outside and yell his name multiple times to get his attention. As I was doing exactly this, calling Cooper's name from our back porch, my brother suddenly started screaming my name frantically from his bedroom window. Essentially, he was yelling at me to get back inside the house immediately. So, I did without asking any questions. I had never heard him sound so panicked and worried before in my life. I rushed to our shared bedroom and asked him what was wrong. He replied with something that absolutely chilled me to the bone. He had seen someone standing directly behind me while I was out in the backyard calling for our dog. It was then that I remembered I had left our back door wide open when I went outside. So we immediately got our mom, grabbed a baseball bat from the garage, and cautiously approached the back door together. We managed to get Cooper back inside safely and took a careful look around our backyard. We noticed that our storage shed door was standing wide open, which was very unusual because we rarely ever used that shed for anything. Earlier that evening, my brother had mentioned that he thought he saw a light inside the shed, which seemed strange at the time. What I believe happened was that someone had broken into our storage shed when I first took Cooper outside to play. A little while before this incident, my brother had sworn he saw a man walk into our backyard. though I'm not sure if it was the same person or not. I know this story isn't exactly the most terrifying thing you've ever heard, but I had never experienced anything like this before, so I just wanted to share what happened to us. I was either in 7th or 8th grade when this terrifying experience took place. It was a hot, humid summer evening in rural Iowa. I lived in one of those typical small Midwestern towns where everyone knows everyone else. You know, the type, nothing bad ever happens here. And if it does, the whole town talks about it for months. The sun had just started to set when my softball game ended at the local park. Everyone was packing up their gear to head home, and my little sister had already been driven home earlier by our dad. My coach, Mr. Peterson, had offered me a ride home, but being a stubborn teenager and embarrassed to accept help, I turned him down. Looking back, that was probably the stupidest decision I could have made. In my mind, my house was only on the other side of town, which really wasn't that far in a place like Cedar Falls. Besides, I had my bike with me, and I was already in trouble for leaving it at other people's houses too often. So once most of the other families had left the park, I packed up my softball gear and began riding home through the quiet residential streets. About 2 blocks into my ride, as I rounded the corner onto Maple Street, I noticed a beat-up sedan following behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Small town and all that, it wasn't like they were speeding toward me or driving aggressively. But after another block, they were still following closely behind me, and something in my gut told me I should take a second look. When I glanced back over my shoulder, alarm bells immediately started ringing in my head. In the car behind me were 2 college-aged guys that I didn't recognize at all. When I say this town was tiny, I mean it. Our population was only about 500 people, and I was pretty sure I should have seen these guys at least once before if they actually lived here. Plus, the nearest college was a 40-minute drive away in Waterloo. But in an attempt to be friendly and give them the benefit of the doubt, I forced a smile and waved as I looked back at them. Neither of them smiled back or waved in return. They didn't even look annoyed at me being in front of them on my bike. No, they were staring at me with dead, emotionless eyes, as if they were completely fixated on me. At the time, I was a huge fan of true crime shows and podcasts, and I remembered hearing once that if you think someone might be following you, you can try making a complete circle around the block. If they're still there after that, chances are very high that they are indeed following you. I didn't have a cell phone back then, so I couldn't call anyone for help. Circling the block to test my suspicions and hopefully calm my nerves seemed like the best option available. I tried to rationalize the whole situation in my head. They're probably just trying to get home, Madison. You're just being paranoid, that's all. So I decided to circle around the residential block. I started by taking 2 left turns in a row, maintaining a steady pace on my bike and deliberately not looking back. My reasoning was that if they didn't realize that I knew they were following me, they might not try anything dangerous. But even as I pedaled through the quiet neighborhood, I could feel my whole body shaking with fear, my mind frantically racing through options for anyone nearby whose house I could go to for help. Someone who might actually be home and answer their door. They kept the exact same pace behind me, never speeding up to get ahead of me, never honking their horn or trying to push me out of their way. But as we rounded the third corner of my test route, real panic started to sink in deep. I threw all subtlety out the window and started pedaling as fast as I possibly could, desperately trying to complete the full circle and figure out my next move. As soon as I sped up dramatically, they did too. I had spotted a house that I recognized belonging to the Martinez family, but the chances of someone being home and actually answering the door seemed slim to none. It was still a block away, and to this day, I have never pedaled faster in my entire life. As soon as I reached their front yard, I practically launched myself off my bike, leaving it abandoned in the grass. I glanced back at the car one last time, and just as I had feared, they had stopped at the exact same spot where I had left my bike. Both men were staring directly at me, just waiting and watching. I chose the side door instead of the front entrance, hoping it would be less obvious to them, but they could still clearly see me. In that final moment of pure panic, I decided that knocking politely wasn't a good idea. They would realize this wasn't actually my house, and there was a chance no one would be home to help me. So instead, I flung open the screen door and tried to squeeze myself partially behind the main door to make it appear like I was entering my own home. I yelled loudly, "I'm home," hoping they would hear me and believe I actually lived there. I don't know how, but by some absolute miracle, as soon as I shouted that, they immediately sped off down the street, and I never saw them again in our town. Once I was certain that they had left the area, I quickly ran around to the back of the Martinez house, hiding behind their garden shed for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only about 15 minutes. Finally, I left my bike there and walked home, ducking behind trees and parked cars every single time I heard a vehicle approaching. My heart was pounding at least 1,000 beats per minute, but I made it home safely. I told my father everything when I got home, but he thought this whole experience was just me making up elaborate excuses for why I didn't bring my bike back home with me. So I never reported the incident to the police. I can only hope that this was some kind of misunderstanding, and that those men have never tried something like this again with anyone else. It was New Year's Eve 2020, and I had just finished my shift as a server at a sports bar and restaurant in Reno, Nevada. I'm female. I was 26 years old at the time, and I had been working at Murphy's Grill for about 2.5 years. After my shift ended, I headed over to a nearby bar called the Silver Dollar that lots of fellow servers and restaurant workers in the area frequently visited after work. While I was there having a drink, I noticed a man who was a regular customer at the place where I worked. I saw him there all the time, multiple times per week. But since he always sat at the bar rather than at the tables in my section, I had never actually had a conversation with him before. This man was middle-aged, quiet, and always dressed professionally in business attire. As I passed by him on my way to the restroom, I greeted him in a friendly, casual way. "Oh, hey there. I see you at Murphy's all the time." I meant it as nothing more than a polite hello, not intending for it to be anything more than basic pleasantries. This man, who was easily double my age, proceeded to tell me something that made my blood run cold. "I've been watching you for the past 3 years," he said, with a completely serious expression on his face. He started telling me in detail about how he would always watch me working while he sat at the bar during his visits. He also mentioned that he worked across the street from Murphy's, so he would watch me walk to my lunch shifts from his office window. I don't remember everything he said to me that night, but he really emphasized how long he had been watching me and waiting for the right opportunity to talk to me. For 3 years, it was actually less time than that since I had only worked at Murphy's for 2.5 years, but his math was still terrifying. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. He told me he was planning to ask me to marry him for his 53rd birthday. What the hell? You've never spoken to me before in your life, and yet you were planning to propose marriage to me. I also remember him asking where I lived, to which I gave the most vague answer possible, just saying somewhere in the area. At some point during this incredibly uncomfortable conversation, I mentioned that I was thinking about not working at Murphy's for much longer, maybe finding a new job. His response was absolutely chilling and will stick with me forever. "Well, don't go anywhere where I can't find you," he said in a tone that was both threatening and possessive. At my very next shift, I immediately relayed all of this information to Derek, the manager on duty, who then went on to ask Tony, the bar manager, about this particular regular customer. Tony's response was dismissive and frankly infuriating. "Oh, him. He's harmless," Tony said with a shrug. That dismissal really pissed me off. I feel like regular customers can say absolutely anything they want to. Staff members and management will always let them get away with it because they don't want to lose the business. It's like servers and bartenders are just expected to tolerate harassment as part of the job. Being 2020, all the restaurants and bars in Reno shut down completely in March due to the pandemic, so I didn't have to continue working there much longer anyway. I'll probably never run into that guy again, which is honestly a relief. I know this story might be less dramatically creepy than many others you hear, and trust me, I've had tons of other disturbing things said to me while working in the service industry over the years. But it was still absolutely eye-opening for me to realize that somebody I had never spoken to had been watching me and apparently fantasizing about me for years. He just looked like a polite, well-dressed businessman minding his own business at the bar. You would never guess that he was harboring these obsessive thoughts. I'm curious to hear if anyone else has had a similar experience with customers or strangers who turned out to be watching them for extended periods of time. So for context, this happened during the pandemic. I don't remember exactly what year it was. Also, the apartment complex I live in has multiple other apartment buildings surrounding it, all built by the same development company in Tampa, Florida. Now onto the story. During the pandemic lockdowns, I would walk my dog Buster around the apartment complex, and that was really the only reason I would go outside, besides occasionally hanging out with the kids at the community playground. The first encounter I had with this teenager was during the summer. I was a child at the time, and it was really hot outside, so I wore shorts that still covered everything appropriately. The area where I was walking Buster was up a big hill that you had to walk up to reach the upper level of apartments. I saw 2 teenage boys across the hill from me, but I didn't think much of it as I continued walking my dog. Then I heard one of the 2 teenage boys yell loudly, "Nice butt." Now, I was clearly 10 to 11 years old at the time, so I found it very strange and just tried to ignore them completely. But then the person I'm assuming was the older guy's younger friend said, "She's totally ignoring us." The first one responded, "Hey, you have a really nice butt." I quickly ran back to my apartment with Buster and didn't tell anyone about the incident because I thought it would be the last time I would see them. Unfortunately, it wasn't the last time. A few weeks later, I was outside with my dog again near my apartment building, and I was just watching Buster sniff around when all of a sudden he started barking like crazy. I looked up, and it was the older teenager, the one who had made the inappropriate comment about me. I quickly picked up Buster so that he wouldn't try to bite the teenager, and I said politely, "Sorry he's barking so much. Did you need something?" Then he asked me how old I was. I told him my age, and he told me he was 17 years old. Then he asked me what apartment building I lived in. I deliberately didn't tell him the specific building. Next, he asked if I wanted to come play video games in his apartment. I said no, because I wasn't allowed to go into strangers' homes, which was a household rule my grandmother had established. He kept insisting that I should come inside and that we would have fun together, and that I could even bring Buster with me. Then he actually tried to grab my arm. I quickly pulled away from him and made up an excuse about needing to go back inside to ask my grandmother something important. He then said, "Okay, I'll be waiting for you outside at the playground swings." I went inside my apartment immediately. I didn't actually ask my grandmother anything, because I had no intention of hanging out with him anyway. And it was definitely against our household rules to go into strangers' apartments. I saw him around the complex a few more times after that, and I made sure to avoid him completely. The encounters finally stopped when I turned 13 and presumably looked too old for his preferences. So, creepy 17-year-old from my apartment complex, let's definitely not meet again. I know this story isn't as severe as some others, but I did want to get it off my chest now that I'm older and realize just how inappropriate and disturbing his behavior really was. So I live in an apartment building in Chicago, Illinois, and this older lady, who used to live directly above me, moved out about 6 months ago. Then, a very quiet family moved into her place. A simple elderly couple, their 25-year-old daughter, and their 15-year-old son named Kevin. At first, everything was completely fine. I've never really socialized much with our building's community, so I just greet them with a polite hello whenever we cross paths in the hallways or lobby. The 15-year-old boy, Kevin, always seemed really shy and uncomfortable. Every time I said hi to him, it was obvious he felt very awkward with any social interaction. The first 3 months were totally chill and peaceful, but out of nowhere, Kevin started screaming throughout the day. Since their apartment is directly above mine, I can hear absolutely everything that goes on up there. At first, I thought it was just him getting frustrated over an online video game. But it wasn't the usual cursing and trash talking you'd expect. He would just yell random things like "ah," with an occasional "no," or various swear words thrown in. It wasn't directed at anyone specifically, just random outbursts of yelling. Around that same time, my grandmother was really sick in the hospital. One day I got so frustrated and exhausted that I yelled back at him through the ceiling to shut up. Surprisingly, it actually worked for a little while, and he stopped yelling completely. Later on, my grandmother passed away, and honestly, Kevin's yelling stopped bothering me as much. I started wearing headphones most of the time to play games or study, so I barely noticed it anymore. The yelling episodes became much more rare anyway, every now and then, but nothing too major. But recently, the screaming has come back in full force again. I don't really care that much because I wear noise-canceling headphones all day and can barely hear it. Still, I find it really weird because whenever I see Kevin in the hallway, he seems completely normal. Shy and quiet, but totally normal. I figured it was just a teenager having anger management issues over video games or school stress. Then yesterday, something really strange happened that made me reconsider what might be going on. My mom was waiting for a package delivery, and the delivery guy accidentally buzzed their apartment instead of ours by mistake. My mom went downstairs to meet the delivery person, but the intercom kept ringing because he was still trying to reach the right apartment. Kevin answered the intercom, but instead of asking if someone was there or saying hello like a normal person, he just started making these disturbing moaning sounds into the speaker system. It wasn't a joking or playful moan at all, but more like a mix of yelling, growling, and sounding, like he was in genuine physical pain. It completely freaked out both the delivery guy and my mom. They both said it was one of the most unsettling things they'd ever heard over an intercom system. I think Kevin might have schizophrenia or some other serious mental illness, and sometimes he has episodes where he loses control. What's really confusing to me is that he seems to have a completely normal social life otherwise. He has a girlfriend who visits regularly, friends who come over, and appears to maintain normal relationships. So should I be worried about this situation? Has anyone else dealt with someone like this living in their building before? Personally, I'm not too concerned since I'll be moving out in about a month for college, but I'm a little worried about my family who will be staying here after I leave. I don't want to cause problems for his family if he's dealing with legitimate mental health issues. But the intercom incident was definitely disturbing enough to make me wonder if there's something more serious going on. I'm not a people person at all. I'm an introvert with resting face syndrome who looks annoyed when I'm actually fine. Why do crazy people seem attracted to me? I've begged God, the universe, Buddha, and every deity I can think of for answers. I think there must be a flashing neon sign over my head that says, "Here's your soulmate," that only weirdos, social rejects, and potential serial killers can see. If I manage to avoid these nutcases, my well-meaning friends who constantly nag me to be more outgoing end up helping them track me down anyway. I beg my friends not to give out my contact information to strangers, but they always think, "Oh, Jessica's made a new friend," and hand over my phone number without asking. My friends really suck sometimes. When I was younger, I competed in figure skating. I picked up 2 obsessive fans in 1994. I had just come off the ice at the Minneapolis Ice Arena. I sat on a bench to wait for my scores to be announced. A rink security guard waved at me and called out, "Jessica, there's a man over here who wants your autograph." We're just amateur competitors. Why would someone want my autograph? I thought to myself. "You're kidding me," I said out loud. "No, that's him over there. The fan is waiting near the entrance gate onto the ice." He held out a spiral notebook and introduced himself. "I'm Brad. I really love your Star Wars themed program. My niece Ashley skated 2 hours ago, but I stayed just to watch you compete." I saw you perform it in Milwaukee and Minneapolis. This guy was blonde and not bad looking, but his blue eyes were completely fixed on me. He grinned continuously and never blinked once while I signed his notebook. To Brad, you're my very first autograph request. Thanks. Best wishes, Jessica. You saw my themed program? I asked him. This was really weird because the themed program is an event where skaters perform an entertaining routine in costumes with props. Mine was set to the Imperial March from The Empire Strikes Back. I wore a full-face Darth Vader helmet and costume. So how did he recognize me? The event I had just finished was freestyle competition, not the themed program. Well, it's probably fine. His niece Ashley is a skater, and my name is listed in the competition program, I thought. Yes, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. You don't see many Vader programs anymore now that the original trilogy is older. Ashley and I were so excited when you skated out in that costume. Did you win first place? He asked. Yes, I did. Thank you so much. How did Ashley do in her competition? I asked, looking around, but none of the many young skaters in the area seemed to be with him. Did you win both times we saw you? We thought you were so brave to skate in that Vader mask, he continued. Yes, I did win at both competitions. I hope Ashley had a good performance, I replied. She got the bronze medal. Ashley's my niece. She went home with my sister earlier, he said, still staring intensely and never blinking. I didn't like that other girls' Beach Boys program. We wanted you to win, he added. Yes, well, thanks so much. Please congratulate Ashley for me. Thanks for the autograph request. I hope you enjoy the rest of the competition. Thank you, Ashley's my niece, he said again. We really don't like that girl from Chicago. She skated in a bikini costume. This was getting very weird now. Oh, you mean Linda. I thought she was brave to take the ice in a swimsuit design. It made me shiver just looking at her. She's a really great skater. Beach Boys music always puts everyone in a good mood, I told him. We didn't like it at all. She wore a bikini to the ice rink, and there are little kids here, he said, glaring at me now. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed my routine. Have a great rest of the competition and drive home safely, I said, desperately wanting to escape this conversation. I'll watch your other events tonight and cheer you on. Oh, that's very nice of you. My results should be posted now. Excuse me. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, I said again, trying to get away from him. I'll wait to see how you did. Come show me your medal when you get it, he insisted. Oh, thank you. You're very kind, I said, and finally managed to get away. My results were posted, and I had won the silver medal. Not bad at all. The lobby was crowded with lines of skaters waiting to take the ice for team practice warm-up. Nathan, a skater friend from Chicago, weaved through the crowd. Devin mentioned that somebody wanted your autograph. Are you turning into a big star? He asked. No, it was just some strange guy who liked my Vader program. He says he's going to be here tonight too. Nathan saw that I had gotten the silver medal and gave me a high five. Then from out of nowhere, Jessica, everyone stopped talking and stared. Brad was standing at the rinkside barrier, way down at the far end. He was leaning over the railing, waving his arms frantically. I held up my medal and he hollered, "Way to go, Jessica." Unfortunately, my guardian angel didn't rescue me from this incredibly embarrassing moment. Nathan offered to keep me company during the evening events because I had made the trip without my husband. Brad left multiple messages at the competition registration desk with his phone number. He called the headquarters hotel, had them ring my room, and left voicemails inviting me to dinner with him, Ashley, and her parents. I didn't respond to any of them. Fortunately, the hotel didn't give him my room number. 3 days after I returned home, he sent a large envelope addressed to me in care of my home skating rink. Inside were 2 8x10 photographs. One was a blown-up photo that he had taken during my Vader routine without my knowledge. The second was a picture of the medal podium from that year's U.S. National Championships, but he had cut off Nancy Kerrigan's head and replaced it with mine, writing Jessica, 1994 Olympic gold medalist, at the top, and drawing a heart around the image. I got really scared then, because I had dealt with a real stalker when I was in high school who made my life hell for years. But calling the police seemed pointless, since he hadn't actually done anything illegal yet. My home rink hosted a tournament over 4th of July weekend. Brad showed up, waited near the registration desk, and confronted me aggressively. This time, my husband was with me. Brad got loud and obnoxious, ranting about our supposed connection, called me vulgar names, and accused me of lying by not telling him I was married. He claimed I was using him to cheat on my husband. My husband was normally a sweet, mild-mannered guy, but he almost punched Brad when Brad grabbed my hand and showed him that I wasn't wearing a wedding ring while skating. I never wore jewelry on the ice for safety reasons. Finally, security threw Brad out and threatened to call the police if he didn't leave the premises immediately. He mailed another disgusting letter to my rink afterward. I had supposedly led him on and was planning to use him somehow. The second weirdo was a fellow skater who wasn't dangerous, but developed an inappropriate crush on me right after my husband died tragically. Like I was going to fall into his arms within a matter of weeks. That story is too long to tell here though. So Brad, let's definitely not meet again. So this happened a few years ago, but it has stuck with me because of how weird and genuinely scary the whole experience was. Every year for the past several years, my parents have been going on a week-long anniversary trip to the Grand Canyon, leaving me home alone at our house in Phoenix, Arizona. I was 20 years old at the time, so it was definitely an appropriate age to be left alone. Well, this particular time, something strange happened on the first day that they were gone. And then this really disturbing incident occurred the night before they were supposed to come home. The first day they left for their trip, a delivery guy came to our front door to drop something off in the morning. But I didn't want to answer it since it was a complete stranger and I was home alone. I thought he would just leave the package at the door like they usually do. Well, he stayed at our front door for about 5 minutes, which seemed unusually long. Then he got into his car and started to drive away, so I went outside because I thought he had finally left. This man immediately got out of his vehicle, leaving it running in the middle of our street, just to hand me a package that I didn't have to sign for at all. No signature required or anything. He wasn't dressed like a typical delivery person and was driving a beat-up personal car instead of a delivery truck. The whole interaction was very weird and made me uncomfortable, but I just took the package and went back inside quickly. Skipping ahead to the end of the week, I was just relaxing in our living room watching television. All of a sudden, at 11 o'clock at night, I saw this rather large figure approach our front door. Our front door has textured glass panels, so you can't see specific features, but you can definitely see the silhouette of a person. He started banging on our door aggressively. He did this for about a minute straight without stopping. Then he just stood there and didn't leave for probably 10 minutes. During that time period, he pounded on the door in several different intervals, each time more aggressive than the last. Luckily, my older sister Kelly and her family live less than a mile away from us. So I immediately called them, and her husband Derek came to pick me up. By this time, I was in complete panic mode and suddenly realized that our two dogs, Max and Buddy, were still in the backyard. Our back door is about 90% glass, and I was absolutely terrified realizing that this person could easily come through our back gate and try to break into our house through the back entrance. My dogs were barking like crazy, which made the whole situation even more frightening. Anyway, I managed to get Max and Buddy inside the house safely, and Derek finally showed up. By then, whoever had been at our front door was completely gone. Derek took me to Kelly's house for the night, and we decided to check our front door security cameras to see who had been there. Here's the really disturbing part. The cameras had been turned off during the entire time that this person was at our house. From what I could figure out, they had been shut off about an hour before he started banging on our door. The cameras had been working normally before that time period. During the time we were reviewing the footage, we discovered they had been mysteriously shut off for about an hour and a half total, which was extremely odd because they're not the type that need to be charged regularly, and they had never malfunctioned before that night. They were actually very sensitive and reliable cameras. To this day, I have absolutely no idea who it was that showed up at our house that night. I checked all the local news websites and police reports, but nothing ever came up about similar incidents in our neighborhood. I don't know if they were planning to rob our house, if they had other more sinister plans, or if it was potentially the same delivery guy from earlier that week who had seemed so strange. But it still completely freaks me out to think about what could have happened. I absolutely hate being home alone at night now because of this experience, and I always make sure our security system is fully activated whenever my parents travel. Did I just hear someone else moving? The question echoes through my mind as I sit in the empty subway car, my hands gripping the cold metal pole beside me. The train rocks gently on the tracks, but something feels wrong. The fluorescent lights above flicker intermittently, casting strange shadows that dance across the worn vinyl seats. I glance at my watch, 11:47 p.m. The last train out of downtown Chicago should have reached my stop 10 minutes ago. I try to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. It's been a long day at the accounting firm, and my mind is probably just playing tricks on me. The subway car is empty except for me, just like it should be at this hour. The familiar rumble of the train moving through the tunnel beneath the city streets should be comforting, but tonight it feels different. Heavier, more oppressive. The intercom crackles to life, but instead of the conductor's voice, there's only static. A sharp burst of white noise that makes me wince. I lean forward, straining to hear if there's a voice underneath the interference, but there's nothing. Just the endless hiss of broken communication. I look out the window, expecting to see the familiar tile walls of the underground stations, but all I see is darkness. Complete, unbroken darkness that seems to stretch on forever. No station lights, no maintenance areas, nothing but the void rushing past the grimy glass. My reflection stares back at me from the window, pale and tired. Michael Johnson, 32 years old, returning home from another late night at the office. But something about my reflection seems off. The features are right, but there's something in the eyes that doesn't belong to me. Something that looks afraid. The train begins to slow, and I feel a surge of relief. Finally, we're approaching a station. But as the brakes squeal and the car lurches, I realize we're not stopping at a platform. We're stopping in the middle of the tunnel. The silence that follows is deafening. The constant rumble of the train has ceased, leaving only the sound of my own breathing and the occasional creak of the car settling on its suspension. The lights continue to flicker, creating a strobe effect that makes everything appear to move in jerky, unnatural motions. I stand up, my legs unsteady from sitting too long. The floor beneath my feet feels wrong somehow, like it's not quite solid. I make my way to the door, pressing my face against the small window to look out into the tunnel. The darkness is absolute, a wall of black that seems to press against the glass. That's when I hear it, a soft shuffling sound like someone dragging their feet along the floor. But I'm alone in the car. I have to be alone. I turn around slowly, my heart beginning to race. The flickering lights make it difficult to see clearly, but I scan every seat, every corner of the car. Empty, all of them empty. But the sound continues, a rhythmic scraping that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The temperature in the car begins to drop. I can see my breath forming small clouds in the suddenly frigid air. I pull my jacket tighter around me, but it doesn't help. The cold seems to seep through my clothes, through my skin, settling deep in my bones. The lights flicker faster now, creating a disorienting pattern that makes my eyes water. In the brief moments of illumination, I catch glimpses of something that shouldn't be there. A shadow that moves independently of the light, a darkness that seems to have substance. I back away from the center of the car, pressing myself against the doors. The metal is ice cold against my back, even through my jacket. I fumble for the emergency call button, but when I press it, nothing happens. No light, no sound, no response. The shuffling sound grows louder, more distinct. It's definitely footsteps now, slow and deliberate. But still, I see no one. The car remains empty, yet something is walking through it, something I can't see but can definitely hear. My breathing becomes rapid and shallow. The air feels thick, almost liquid, like I'm trying to breathe through water. I press harder against the doors, wishing I could somehow push through them and escape into the tunnel. But the doors remain sealed, trapping me inside this metal coffin. The shadow moves again, and this time I see it clearly. It's not cast by any of the flickering lights. It's something else entirely, something that exists independently of the normal rules of light and darkness. It slides along the floor like spilled ink, moving with purpose toward where I stand. I try to call out, to yell for help, but my voice catches in my throat. Only a strangled whisper escapes my lips. The shadow seems to respond to the sound, pausing in its approach as if listening. Then I hear the voice. It's soft at first, barely audible above the electric hum of the train's systems. But it grows stronger, clearer, until I can make out the words. Why did you get on? The voice is neither male nor female, young nor old. It seems to come from the shadow itself. a sound that bypasses my ears and speaks directly to my mind. I want to answer, to explain that I was just trying to get home, but the words won't come. The shadow continues its approach, and I notice that wherever it touches, the already dim lights grow even darker. It's not just a shadow, it's an absence of light, a void that consumes illumination like a hungry thing. My legs begin to shake. I slide down the door until I'm sitting on the floor, my back still pressed against the cold metal. The shadow is only a few feet away now, and I can feel its presence like a weight pressing down on my chest. The voice speaks again, closer this time. "You shouldn't have taken the last train." As the words wash over me, memories begin to surface. Memories I've tried to suppress for years. The accident, the investigation, the family that was destroyed because of my negligence. The reason I work late every night, trying to bury myself in numbers and spreadsheets, so I don't have to think about what I've done. The shadow knows. Somehow, it knows about the falsified safety reports, the corners I cut to save the company money. It knows about the subway accident 5 years ago that killed dozens of people. An accident that happened because I signed off on substandard brake systems to meet our budget requirements. The lights stop flickering and go out completely. In the absolute darkness, I hear the voice more clearly than ever. Thomas Riley, Patricia Martinez, James Chen, Angela Foster. Names, the victims' names. Names I've tried to forget, but that haunt my dreams every night. The shadow is reciting them one by one, each name an accusation that cuts through me like a blade. "Do you remember them, Michael?" I do remember. I remember every single one of them. Their faces stared back at me from newspaper articles and television reports. Families destroyed, children left without parents, all because I chose profit over safety. In the darkness, I feel something cold touch my hand. Not the shadow, something else, something solid. I look down and see a pale hand gripping my wrist. The hand of a woman, her skin gray and lifeless. More hands reach out from the darkness. Men, women, children, all of them cold and gray, all of them reaching for me with desperate, grasping fingers. The victims of the crash, the people who died because of my choices. I try to pull away, but there are too many of them. They grab at my clothes, my hair, my skin. Their touch is like ice, burning with a cold that goes deeper than flesh and bone. I can feel their pain, their fear, their final moments of terror as the train derailed and their world turned to chaos and death. The voice speaks again, and now I recognize it. It's not one voice but many, all of them speaking in unison. The voices of the dead. "You took everything from us. Our lives, our futures, our families. Now you'll know what it feels like to be trapped, to be helpless, to wait for death in the darkness." The hands pull me down, and I feel myself sinking into the floor of the train car. The metal gives way like quicksand, and I'm falling through darkness that seems to go on forever. The voices follow me down, a chorus of accusation and pain. I try to scream, but the darkness fills my mouth, my lungs, my very soul. I'm drowning in the weight of my guilt, in the consequences of choices I made years ago. The train car, the tunnel, the entire world fades away until there's nothing left but the voices and the cold. When I finally stop falling, I find myself standing in a familiar place. The subway car, exactly as it was before. The lights flicker overhead, casting the same eerie shadows. But now I understand. This isn't a train taking me home. This is my punishment, my prison. I look at my hands and see that they're pale and gray, just like the hands that pulled me down. I'm one of them now, one of the victims. But my crime was different. I wasn't innocent. I was the cause of their suffering. The train begins to move again, and I feel a new passenger boarding. A young woman, tired from a long day at work, just trying to get home. She doesn't know that she's getting on the last train, the one that doesn't go where you expect it to go. I want to warn her, to tell her to get off while she still can. But when I try to speak, only that same ethereal voice comes out. Why did you get on? She looks around the empty car, confusion in her eyes. She can't see me, can't see any of us. But she can hear the voice, feel the presence of something wrong in the darkness. The train continues through the tunnel, carrying its newest passenger toward a destination she never chose. And I realize with growing horror that this is my eternity, to be part of the thing that destroyed me, to help collect new souls for the darkness. The woman presses herself against the doors, just as I did. She calls out for help, just as I tried to do. But there's no escape from the last train. There never was. The lights flicker faster now, and in the brief moments of illumination, I catch glimpses of my fellow passengers. Dozens of them, all pale and gray, all reaching out with desperate hands. We're all trapped here together, victims and perpetrator alike, bound by tragedy and guilt. The voice speaks again, and I realize it's coming from my own lips now. You shouldn't have taken the last train. The cycle begins again, and I know it will continue forever. The last train never reaches its destination. It just keeps moving through the darkness, collecting passengers who can never disembark, carrying them deeper into the tunnels beneath the city where the living never go. I am the conductor now, and the passenger, and the victim all at once. This is my punishment, my prison, my eternity. And every night, when the clock strikes 11:47, another soul will board the last train, and I'll be there to welcome them into the darkness. The train moves on through the endless tunnel, and I wait for the next passenger to arrive. In the distance, I can hear the sound of footsteps on the platform, someone running to catch the last train home. They don't know that home is not where this train is going. They don't know that once you board the last train, you never get off. The doors open with a mechanical hiss, and I prepare to greet my next companion in the darkness. The last train is never empty for long. There's always someone else who needs to pay for their sins, someone else who thinks they can escape the consequences of their choices. But in the tunnels beneath the city, in the darkness where the last train runs its eternal route, there is no escape. There is only the voice in the darkness, the cold touch of guilty hands, and the endless journey through the night. Welcome aboard the last train. Mind the gap. I don't know how to put it into words, but I'll give it a shot. It wasn't just the notification sound from my phone. It wasn't just the strange desperation in the message I received. There was something in the atmosphere that evening, something wrong. Something that made my skin crawl before I even read the first word. The message arrived at exactly 3:27 in the morning. I had been alone in my house, as always. The quiet hum of the central air, and the occasional delivery truck rumbling down Maple Street, the only sounds keeping me company. It had been a restless night, the kind that left me scrolling through social media feeds, checking work emails, reading random articles, wrestling with the odd sensation that had been gnawing at me for the past week. A sensation I couldn't shake. like something was building up, something beyond my control. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I almost ignored it. Messages this late were usually spam or drunk friends sending memes. But something compelled me to check it. My thumb moved on its own, like I had no choice but to look. The message was from Marcus Webb, a name I recognized but hadn't seen in months. My old neighbor from the apartment complex downtown, before I moved to this suburban house in Maplewood. "Don't leave your house," the message read. "Stay inside. It's happening tonight." I stared at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. Maybe Marcus had been drinking again, or maybe he was referring to some neighborhood drama I wasn't aware of. But something about the message felt urgent, desperate even. I typed back quickly, "What are you talking about? What's happening?" The response came immediately. "You're in danger. It's here. It's going to happen and you can't stop it. But if you go outside, if you take one step past your front door, it will be too late. They'll find you." My hands trembled as I read the words. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. "Who will find me? Marcus, what do you mean? Is this some kind of prank?" "No," came the reply. "It's real. It's real and it's too late for most of us, but if you stay inside, you might make it through. You just have to wait for it to pass." Then nothing. The message thread went silent. I sat there in my living room, the phone still glowing in my hands. My heart was pounding, and a cold, suffocating dread was settling in my stomach. I glanced around the room. Everything looked normal: my leather couch, the coffee table cluttered with magazines, the TV still playing some late-night infomercial on mute. Yet something felt off. Was Marcus messing with me? Or was there something real behind his warning? The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something was indeed wrong. My eyes drifted to the front window, the streetlights casting long shadows across my small front yard. It was unusually quiet outside. No cars passing by, no neighbors walking their dogs, no sounds from the strip mall a few blocks away. Just stillness. I checked the time on my phone. 3:32 in the morning. But it felt like the entire world had stopped moving. And then, without warning, I heard it, a sound. Subtle but unmistakable, a slow, deliberate footstep on my front porch. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The hair on my arm stood up, and I held my breath, straining to listen. Another step, this time closer to the door. Who could it be? I wondered. Marcus had warned me to stay inside, but who was outside? My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone again, half expecting another message to appear, something to explain what was happening. But the screen remained dark. I moved carefully toward the front door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. I didn't want to make a sound. I didn't want whoever it was to know I was awake, aware. I felt like prey, trapped in my own home. The footsteps continued, slow, deliberate, circling. I couldn't stop myself from looking through the peephole, but there was nothing there. I blinked hard, nothing, no one. The street was empty, too empty. The usual glow from the neighbor's porch light seemed dimmer than usual. My hand trembled as I gripped the doorknob. Should I open it? Should I step outside to investigate, or would that make things worse? "They'll find you if you go outside." Marcus's words echoed in my mind. My breathing became shallow, my heart hammering painfully against my ribs. What did he mean? What was happening in Maplewood tonight? I stepped back from the door, panic beginning to rise inside me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Had someone been on my porch? Had I imagined it? Or was it something far worse, something that was watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move? And then I heard it again. But this time, it wasn't footsteps. It was a voice, muffled, coming from just outside the door, whispering, "Don't open the door." My blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to grab my car keys and speed away from this place. But my body refused to move. Something about the warning felt so raw, so urgent, that I couldn't dismiss it as another sick joke. There was weight to it, a finality that felt too real to ignore. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, my palms slick with sweat, my mind spinning. Was it the same voice as the one who'd messaged me? The whisper was too muffled to tell for sure. But then I heard it again, this time clearer, like the speaker had moved closer to the door. The words sent ice through my veins. "You don't understand. It's not safe anymore." The voice sounded strained now, breaking. Whoever was behind that door was terrified. My instincts screamed at me to run, to grab my pickup truck keys and bolt, but my body refused to cooperate. I couldn't move, couldn't tear myself away from the door. I felt trapped, paralyzed by a fear I couldn't name. For what felt like hours, I stood there, barely breathing, listening to the strange quiet. The footsteps had stopped, but something else was pressing in now. Something invisible, like the very air had thickened. It was harder to breathe, harder to think clearly. Then suddenly, the silence was shattered by a loud bang against the door. My body jerked back as if I'd been struck. I gasped, eyes wide, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Bang! Again a sharp, insistent knock that rattled the door frame. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, thoughts swirling into chaos. Who was doing this? Why was I being targeted? "Please," the voice whispered again, barely audible now, but the urgency was unmistakable. "Please don't open the door. You don't know what's out there. It's—" The voice cut off abruptly. Another bang sounded against the door, this time louder and more violent. I flinched at the force of it, my breath catching. And then nothing, complete silence. For several agonizing seconds, I stood motionless, straining to hear any sound, any sign that someone was still outside. But the house was eerily quiet once more. My breath came out in shallow, uneven gasps, the fear pressing down on my chest like a weight. I stared at the door. There was no way I could just ignore this. Whoever was out there wasn't leaving. I needed to know what was happening. With shaking hands, I reached for the door handle again, my fingers ice cold and stiff. Nausea hit me, my stomach churning as the thought crossed my mind. What if I was about to make the worst decision of my life? What if opening that door was the last thing I would ever do? But I had to know. I had to see for myself. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and turned the handle. The door creaked open slowly, the sound sharp in the stillness. I barely dared to look outside, but when I did, my heart nearly stopped. The front porch was empty. No one, nothing. I blinked, my mind racing, trying to process what I was seeing. Just my familiar porch with its weathered wooden planks and the rocking chair I'd inherited from my grandmother. The street beyond was dimly lit by street lamps, the kind I'd walked past countless times. Nothing out of the ordinary. No one my eyes scanned left and right down the street. Had I imagined the knocks, the voice slam? The sudden sound made me jump. It came from behind me. The door had shut on its own, as if pushed by an invisible force. I spun around, heart in my throat. The door was closed again, but the air in the house felt different now, charged, electric. My eyes darted from corner to corner, half expecting something to emerge from the shadows. A low humming filled the air. Not from the air conditioning or any appliance, but something much deeper, something I could feel in my bones. It made every hair on my body stand on end. I felt it again, that sensation, the one I'd been fighting all night, the one that told me I wasn't alone. Something was in here with me. I backed away from the door, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. What was happening? Who was behind this? And more importantly, why was it happening to me? Then I heard it again, a whisper so faint I could barely make it out. Don't trust what you see. My heart skipped a beat. I turned quickly, searching the room, but there was nothing there. Just the familiar layout of my living room, unchanged. But it wasn't the same anymore. Nothing felt real. Everything felt twisted in a way I couldn't explain. The floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, and that's when I saw it. A figure, just a shadow, nothing more, standing in the doorway leading to my kitchen. It was tall, thin, and dark, like it was absorbing the light from the room. I couldn't breathe then. In a voice barely louder than a whisper, it said, "You're too late." And I knew right then I was no longer in control. I couldn't move. My legs refused to cooperate, locked in place by a terror so raw that it made my whole body shake. My chest tightened with every shallow breath, my pulse thundering in my ears as the figure in the doorway remained still, like it was studying me, waiting for me to react. "You're too late," it repeated in that low, gravelly voice, and the words bounced off the walls of my house, amplifying the dread that now clung to every surface. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything that could break the suffocating tension, but the fear rooted me to the spot. My eyes locked on the shadow, trying to understand what I was seeing, or what I thought I was seeing. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, and its form seemed to shift and waver in the dim light, as though it wasn't quite solid. A distorted mirage of darkness. Was it real? I couldn't tell anymore. The longer I stared at it, the more it seemed to blur at the edges, like a dream slipping away. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking violently as I tried to unlock it. There was no way I was going to stand here, frozen, waiting for whatever this was. I needed help. The screen lit up. I hurriedly opened my contacts, looking for someone to call, anyone. But just as my thumb hovered over 911, the figure took a step forward. My heart lurched. It was moving. Slowly, almost gliding, its long limbs stretching impossibly far as it approached. "Don't," I whispered to myself, trying to steady my shaking hands. "It's not real." But the voice in my head didn't sound convincing anymore. The air around me felt heavy, thick, with something oppressive that seemed to choke the life from the room. The figure moved again, its presence consuming the space between us. I looked toward the front door. The street outside was still silent, deserted. There was no escape route. The only way out was through the figure standing between me and the rest of the world. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to croak, my voice thin and fragile. I didn't expect an answer, but it came anyway. "Because you were warned," the figure rasped. Its voice was like gravel scraping against concrete, low and rough, yet somehow distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away, a place I couldn't reach. I stepped back, my foot landing on something that felt wrong. I didn't want to look down. I already knew what it was. The hardwood floor, warped into something unnatural, as if it had come alive beneath my feet. "What do you mean I was warned?" I asked, my throat dry. The figure tilted its head, and that's when I saw its face, or what passed for one. Pale, stretched skin pulled tight over an angular skull, eyes too wide, too black, like holes that absorbed all light. I stumbled backward, pressing myself against the wall as if it could protect me from whatever this was. My breath came in gasps, desperation creeping in. "You received the message," the figure said, its voice slithering around my thoughts. "You didn't listen. Now it's too late." I couldn't understand. Was it talking about Marcus's messages? Was it referring to something else? The fear was clouding my mind, and I struggled to keep my thoughts from scattering. I had to get out. The door was behind me, but the moment I moved toward it, I knew that something would stop me. There was no way out, not now, not anymore. The figure took another step forward, its long fingers reaching toward me. I could feel the chill in the air, the cold of something unnatural pressing in around me. A loud crash broke through the silence, sharp and sudden. It sounded like something heavy had fallen in the bedroom. I snapped my head toward the noise, my eyes wide with panic. What was that? What was happening? The figure didn't react, didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting. I turned back to face it. It was getting closer now, closer than I wanted to admit. My body screamed at me to do something, anything, but I was paralyzed by the terror that had completely consumed me. Then a voice, someone else's voice, cut through the air, distant but clear. It was frantic, panicked. "Hello, is anyone there? Hello." I gasped, my head snapping toward the sound. Was someone outside? My mind tried to grasp onto any thread of hope, any shred of logic that could explain what was happening. But before I could move, the figure spoke again. "No one is coming," it said. "No one can help you now." The words hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment I believed it. There was no escape, no salvation, just this thing standing before me, a nightmare made real. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take any more, a blinding light pierced the room, a burst of pure white, too intense to look at directly. I squinted, shielding my eyes, heart pounding in my chest. The figure recoiled, its body writhing, twisting as if the light was burning it. A harsh, guttural scream tore through the air, sending a wave of nausea crashing over me. I stumbled back, blinded by the light, but when I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone. The room was empty, everything was silent. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure if what had just happened was real or just another trick my mind had played on me. But the air was still thick with tension, and the feeling of dread still lingered, crawling under my skin. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing was ever going to be the same again. I stood there, my breath coming in shallow gasps, as the silence in the room wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a loud reminder of the terror I had just faced, or thought I had faced. Had the figure been real? Had it been a hallucination? My mind, already strained by the events of the night, struggled to make sense of what had happened. I took a tentative step toward the kitchen, my eyes scanning every corner of the house, every shadow that lingered. But the rooms were unchanged, too still, too ordinary. It was as though nothing had occurred, and yet everything had. The faint smell of coffee from this morning's pot mixed with the recycled air from the central system did nothing to calm my nerves. It only made the space feel smaller, more confining. My phone was still clutched tightly in my hand, its screen dark. I glanced at it once more, almost afraid of what I might see. The messages from Marcus, the ominous warnings, I couldn't get them out of my head. His contact information was there, but the messages, they sounded like they had come from somewhere deep within my own fears, as if they had always been there, waiting for me to notice. I opened the message thread again, my trembling fingers hovering over the screen. My thoughts were clouded, too much swirling in my mind, but one thing was certain: I couldn't ignore what had happened. Whatever it was that had been stalking me wasn't over. Not yet. I typed a message back to Marcus. "What's happening? Are you okay?" The response came immediately, faster than humanly possible. "You should have stayed inside," it read. I froze. This couldn't be happening again. The message. It wasn't from Marcus. It couldn't be. "Who is this?" I typed back, my voice breaking even as I wrote. The phone buzzed with Marcus's signature, but the words that appeared made my stomach drop. "You're not safe," the message read. "It's already begun." I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to end this nightmare and shut out the madness, but my finger hovered over the screen, unable to break away. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, the weight of dread crushing me. What had begun? What was coming for me? "You can't run," the next message appeared. "It knows where you are. It knows what you've done. What have I done?" I could feel the walls closing in, my chest tightening again. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank, some twisted joke. But the way the messages felt, the way the words seemed to carve their way into my brain, it felt too much like a warning. "Who are you?" I typed back, my voice barely audible even to myself. "What do you want from me?" The phone went silent. For a moment, I thought whatever this was had ended, that perhaps the connection had been broken. But then a new message appeared, and the words made my blood run cold. "You'll understand soon enough." I lowered the phone, my hands shaking so violently that I nearly dropped it. My thoughts were a tangle of fear and confusion, unable to separate the real from the unreal. The house seemed to press in around me, the walls constricting with each breath I took. I couldn't stay here, not after that. I needed to leave. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket and keys, my mind racing. The street outside was quiet, but at least it felt like a space I knew, something I could navigate. I paused for a moment, listening to the stillness around me. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was all normal, too normal, as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath me. The front door opened with a quiet click, and I stepped out onto the porch, the cool night air greeting me like an old friend. But as I turned to lock the door behind me, something made my skin crawl. A shadow. It was just a flicker at first, barely noticeable. But then it moved. A figure, dark and indistinct, just at the edge of my front yard. I froze, my eyes locked on it. It didn't move closer, but it didn't disappear either. I took a shaky step forward, my instincts screaming at me to turn around, to run back inside. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to see what it was. I approached cautiously, the sound of my own footsteps loud in the quiet night. The street was unnervingly silent, every step I took echoing off the houses around me. The figure remained just out of reach, like it was waiting, watching. And then, as if it had been a trick of the light, it vanished. The yard was empty again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't imagined it. that it had been real. I turned to go back inside, but just as I reached the porch steps, I heard it, a voice, the same one that had messaged me. "You can't escape," it whispered, the words curling through the air like smoke. Not anymore. I froze. The world around me began to distort, bending and twisting in ways that made my head spin. The porch beneath my feet felt unsteady, like it was moving, shifting, and the air around me grew heavy, suffocating. And then it came again, the noise, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the house. It was closer this time, and this time I knew whatever it wasn't just in my head anymore. It was real, and it was coming for me. I turned to flee, but the street seemed longer now, my pickup truck too far to reach. With each step, the growl grew louder, more distinct, until it was so close that I could feel the vibrations in my chest. Something was behind me. Something was following me. I ran. I could feel it now, a presence behind me, moving with a speed that defied logic. The growl was no longer distant. It was close, too close, like breath on the back of my neck. My body was frozen with fear, and my legs, once ready to carry me, now felt like concrete. But I kept running. I had no choice. The street stretched on endlessly, its length warping with each panicked step I took. The houses seemed to close in, leaning inward, as if the entire neighborhood was alive, conspiring against me. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and I couldn't tell if the pounding sound was my heart or the creature pursuing me. I reached my truck, parked at the curb. I was almost there, just a few more steps. But as I fumbled for my keys, the darkness around me seemed to swallow the light from the street lamps. I hesitated, fear gnawing at the edges of my mind. The growl was now deafening, vibrating through the very air around me. There was no time to think. I threw myself at the truck door, my hands slipping on the handle, my arms flailing to maintain balance. The keys fell from my trembling fingers, clattering on the asphalt. The growl stopped. I spun around, expecting to see something, a figure, a shape, a hint of whatever was stalking me. But there was nothing. Only the empty street, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights. But I could feel it, that suffocating weight pressing in, pulling me towards something. I dropped to my knees, scrambling for my keys in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I felt around blindly, my fingers finding only cold pavement. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't afford to rest. With a grunt, I found the keys and forced myself to my feet, pushing toward the truck door. The silence was somehow worse than the growl had been, settling over me like a thick blanket. My mind screamed for me to keep moving to escape, but the terror was overwhelming, numbing me to everything else. As I finally got the door open, a cold wind swept through the street, carrying with it a faint, rotten odor. My stomach churned, and I fought the urge to gag. The scent was unnatural, thick with decay, as if something had died and was still lingering. The smell grew stronger as I climbed into the truck, crawling into my lungs, suffocating me. I jammed the key into the ignition, but as I turned it, I froze. There was something in the rearview mirror, something dark, something that shouldn't be there. A figure, tall, unnaturally still, with no discernible features. Its presence was like a heavy fog, filling the mirror with a sense of dread that wrapped itself around my mind, my very soul. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. The growl had returned, but this time it was different. Now there was only silence, deep, suffocating silence. the kind of silence that made every nerve in your body stand on end. And then a voice, low, faint, but unmistakable, you can't leave. It was the same voice, the voice from the messages, the voice that had warned me. But this time, it wasn't coming from my phone. It was right behind me. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. Why? I choked out, my voice barely above a whisper. My legs were trembling beneath me, my entire body screaming for me to drive away, to do anything but sit there, paralyzed with fear. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it began to move. Slowly, deliberately. The sound of its movement was impossibly loud in the confined space of the truck cab. But its movements were unnatural, jerky, as if it were struggling to maintain some semblance of form. I could see it now in the mirror, flickering in and out of existence, like a broken television screen. One moment it was tall and imposing, the next it seemed to collapse into itself, shrinking, distorting. And yet it kept coming. Each movement was deliberate, each shift an advance toward me. My chest tightened as panic surged. I needed to drive. There had to be a way out. I turned the key frantically, the engine sputtering to life. But as I put the truck in drive, something grabbed my shoulder. The touch was ice cold, like death itself. I screamed, yanking away from the contact, but there was nowhere to go. The figure was right there, its face now visible in the mirror, pale, stretched skin pulled tight over an angular skull. Eyes too wide, too black, like voids that pulled at my sanity. I stomped on the gas pedal, the truck lurching forward, but the figure didn't let go. Its grip tightened, and I could feel its presence seeping into my very bones, chilling me from the inside out. "You were warned," it said, its voice now crystal clear, resonating through every fiber of my being. "You didn't listen. Now it's too late." The truck careened down the street, but I wasn't in control anymore. The figure was guiding it, steering it toward something I couldn't see. My hands gripped the wheel, but they weren't mine anymore. Nothing was mine anymore. And then, as if the universe itself had decided to make its final statement, the headlights flickered. A single moment of total darkness. When they returned, the figure was gone. The truck was coasting to a stop. The silence returned. I sat frozen, my breath coming in gasps, unsure of what had just happened. Had it been real? Had the thing ever been there? But the stillness was now unbearable, heavy with the unspoken question that hung in the air. Was it truly gone? I wasn't so sure anymore. And as I sat there in my truck, in the middle of an empty street in Maplewood, I realized that some warnings come too late. Some things, once they begin, can never be stopped. The engine was still running, but I had nowhere to go. Digital shadows. I had never signed up for any mysterious online services, but every night the messages came. Strange, automated texts, emails that I hadn't requested, notifications I hadn't subscribed to. And the worst part, each message left a lingering feeling, like someone or something was creeping closer into my digital life. It began slowly. A faint buzz from my phone in the silence of my rented house. The distant ping of an unknown notification flashing across the screen. At first, I thought it was just spam, maybe a glitch in some app or some marketing bot. But each message brought more discomfort than the last. I lived alone in a 2-story house on Maple Street, the kind of place that real estate agents called charming, but really meant old and creaky. Every step on the wooden stairs echoed through the empty rooms. Every gust of wind outside made the windows rattle in their frames. the kind of place that felt cozy during the day, but unsettling when darkness fell. The first message came on a Tuesday night. It was barely noticeable at first, just a soft vibration. But when I looked at the screen, the sender was unfamiliar, a string of random letters and numbers that looked more like a computer error than a real address. I deleted it without reading, assuming it was junk mail. But it didn't stop coming. 3 more messages, then silence. And then they started again. I opened the first one reluctantly, my finger hovering over the screen. The message was blank. Just empty space where text should be. But somehow I could feel something in that emptiness, a presence, a weight that made my skin crawl. The moment I tried to reply, the message disappeared, replaced by the usual message not found error. I checked my phone's settings, but the sender's address had vanished completely. The second wave came the next night, and the next. Always the same pattern. Always the same eerie emptiness in the messages, as if something was trying to communicate but couldn't quite break through. And then, always, the messages would vanish without a trace. It wasn't long before I began noticing other things. Little details that felt wrong. I remember one particular evening. I was working at my desk, editing a client's logo when I heard it, the faintest of sounds, like fingers tapping on glass, just behind me. My head snapped toward the window, expecting to see someone there, but the yard was empty. Only the soft glow of the streetlight illuminated the overgrown grass. I turned back to my computer, trying to focus on the design. But then the feeling hit me, sharp and sudden, like ice water trickling down my spine. My heart raced. The house felt smaller somehow. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more alive. I stood up, walking toward the kitchen to make myself some coffee. Anything to break the tension. Just as I stepped into the hallway, something shifted. The air itself seemed different, thicker, heavier. A smell hit me hard, like old electronics and something metallic. It wasn't there before. I had cleaned that morning, and that's when my phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't wait for the notification to disappear. I grabbed the phone quickly, almost desperate to see something normal, something that would make the anxiety in my chest fade. I swiped to open the message without thinking. The screen flickered to life, and then words appeared, distorted, pixelated letters that seemed to shift and change as I watched. It's time. I froze. The words felt like a command, but there was something wrong about how they appeared on the screen, something unsettling about the way they pulsed with an unnatural light. My palms began to sweat. The house felt colder, as though the walls themselves were closing in. The message deleted itself before I could screenshot it. I stared at the screen, but the conversation thread had disappeared entirely. The notification sound echoed in my ears like a whisper. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows in my bedroom stretched further, curling around the furniture, lingering by the door. The hum of my computer was louder than usual. The silence between the digital interruptions felt too thick, too heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched through every camera, every screen in the house. I told myself it was nothing. Stress from work, too much time alone, too many late nights staring at screens. Everyone gets paranoid about technology sometimes, right? But the messages kept coming. Each one felt more personal, more directed at me specifically. Each time, the text grew clearer, as if the unknown sender was getting closer to breaking through whatever barrier separated us. It wasn't just the messages. I began to notice things changing on my computer when I was sure I hadn't touched them. Files moved to different folders. Browser tabs opened to websites I'd never visited. My desktop wallpaper changed to images I didn't recognize, dark, abstract shapes that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. One morning, I woke up to find a new folder on my desktop. I don't know how it got there, but it was labeled with my full name, Michael James Thorne, in a font I'd never seen before. The folder contained a single text file. You can't hide. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my heart pounding. My mind raced. How did this get here? Was someone accessing my computer remotely? The thought made my stomach turn. I ran every security scan I could think of, but nothing came up. The file was clean, normal, except for the fact that it shouldn't exist. It wasn't long after that the messages started changing. At first, it was just the same empty notifications, a brief moment of static text, and then nothing. Now they were different. The words had rhythm, a cadence that seemed to match the beating of my own heart. "You see me," appeared on my screen one night, the letters bright against the dark background. I stared at the message, my breath catching in my throat. The question lingered there, glowing, insistent. I glanced around my office, half expecting to see something, anything, lurking in the corners of the room. But there was nothing. Just the blue glow of my monitor and the shadows it cast on the walls. I tried to close the message, but it wouldn't go away. My mouse clicked frantically, but the text remained, pulsing slightly as if it were alive. "You see me?" it asked again, this time the letters larger, bolder. The words seemed to burn into the screen. I slammed my laptop shut, but the question didn't stop. It echoed in my mind. "Do you see me? Do you see me? Do you see me?" I rushed to the window, my heart racing. I pulled back the curtains and scanned the street below, half expecting to see someone watching from the shadows. But it was just the quiet, empty street. No movement, no signs of life. Yet the feeling of being observed didn't fade. When I turned back to my desk, every screen in the house was on. My laptop, my tablet, even the old TV in the corner, all displaying the same message. "Do you see me?" I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. House felt like it was alive, every electronic device pulsing with the same malevolent energy. The lights flickered in rhythm with the text, casting dancing shadows on the walls. My phone rang. Not buzzed, rang. An actual phone call with a ringtone I'd never heard before. A low, haunting melody that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I answered it with shaking hands. The voice was different this time. No longer digital, no longer fragmented. It was human, calm, almost soothing. "I'm already here," it whispered, and the words sent electricity through my entire body. I didn't have time to react. Every screen in the house went black simultaneously, plunging the room into darkness. The silence was deafening. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers brushing against the wall as I tried to find it. But the moment I reached for it, everything flickered back to life, blinding me with sudden brightness. For a split second, the house seemed different. The furniture was in the wrong places. The air was thick with a scent I couldn't identify. It wasn't the usual smell of my home. It was something older, mustier, like a basement that had been sealed for years. And then I saw it, a reflection. Not mine, moving across the black screen of my powered-down laptop. It was there, just at the edge of my vision, but every time I turned to look directly at it, it was gone. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Panic began to rise in my chest, and my hands shook as I reached for my phone, the metal surface cold against my palm. The reflection was back. This time I saw it clearly. Just for a moment. A tall, thin figure, its outline dark against the glossy screen. The shape of a person, but not quite right. Too tall, too angular. It moved like it was underwater, a blur of motion that disappeared the second I focused on it. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't losing my mind. Whatever it was in my house, and it was getting closer. I could feel it watching me through every screen, every camera, every reflection. I backed away from the desk, my breathing coming in short, sharp gasps. I needed to leave, needed to get out, but my legs wouldn't move. My body wouldn't respond. My phone buzzed, and a new message appeared, softer than before. "Don't try to run. You can't escape me." I threw the phone across the room, but the words echoed in my mind. The screens were flickering faster now, the reflections moving like they were alive, like they were trying to break through the digital barrier. that separated our worlds. My only thought was to escape. But there was no escape, not from this. The air in the house had become suffocating, thick with an energy that made every breath feel like swallowing static. Every electronic device hummed with an unnatural frequency, a low drone that seemed to resonate in my bones. Screens flickered in perfect synchronization, casting the house in an eerie strobe effect that made everything look distorted, unreal. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood frozen in the middle of the room, unable to move, unable to think clearly. The familiar space of my office had transformed into something alien. The desk where I'd worked for months now seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The chair I'd sat in countless times looked wrong, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. There was something else now too, a sound, not the usual electronic hums and beeps I'd grown accustomed to. This was different, a soft scratching, like fingernails on glass, coming from somewhere inside the walls themselves. It was faint at first, barely audible over the humming of the screens, but it grew stronger with each passing second. I tried to move toward the door, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. Something invisible held me in place, like the very air around me had become thick as honey. My breathing became labored, each inhale a struggle against the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to be closing in from all directions. The scratching sound grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from multiple directions now, the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath my feet. As if something was trying to claw its way out of the house itself. And then all the screens went dark, complete darkness. The sudden absence of light was so absolute that I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. The scratching continued, joined now by a new sound, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving through the house with purpose. I tried to call out, but my voice was trapped somewhere deep in my throat. All that emerged was a weak rasp that was immediately swallowed by the darkness. The footsteps were getting closer, each one echoing through the empty rooms like a death knell. A cold draft swept across my face, carrying with it the scent of decay and something else, something electronic, like burning circuits. The temperature in the room plummeted so quickly that I could see my breath forming small clouds in the blackness. Then the screens flickered back on, but they weren't displaying my usual desktop anymore. Instead, they showed the interior of my house, but from angles that shouldn't exist. Security camera feeds from devices I didn't own, showing rooms from perspectives that defied the physical layout of the building. I could see myself standing in the office, but the image was wrong, distorted. As if I was looking at myself through a funhouse mirror. In one of the feeds, I saw something else. A figure standing in the doorway behind me, tall, impossibly thin, its presence warping the very pixels around it. It didn't move like a person, more like a glitch in reality itself, flickering between existence and void. I spun around, but the doorway was empty. Just the dark hallway leading to the rest of the house. But when I looked back at the screen, the figure was closer. Much closer. It was standing right behind where I should be, its form stretching up toward the ceiling like a shadow cast by something too large to comprehend. My hands trembled as I reached for the laptop, desperate to shut it down, to break the connection between whatever was happening and the digital world that surrounded me. But the moment my fingers touched the keyboard, the screen changed. Text began appearing, one letter at a time, as if someone was typing in real time. You thought you could escape by moving here. You thought distance would save you. But I've been waiting, I've been watching. Through every screen, every camera, every connection you've made to the world beyond these walls. The words burned themselves into my vision, each letter pulsing with an otherworldly light. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. The text continued. You invited me in. Every time you connected to the network, every time you opened a message, every time you looked at a screen, you opened a door. And now I'm here. The house began to shake. An earthquake, something else. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with the same frequency as the electronic devices. Pictures fell from their hooks, books tumbled from shelves, and the very foundation of the building groaned under some invisible pressure. Through it all, the screens remained perfectly stable, showing their impossible feeds of the house's interior. And in every single one, the figure was there. Sometimes in the background, sometimes in the foreground, but always watching, always getting closer. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The air around me had become thick as molasses, holding me in place while the digital nightmare unfolded around me. The scratching sounds from the walls grew louder, more frantic, as if something was trying to break through from another dimension. And then I heard it, my own voice, coming from the speakers of every device in the house, speaking words I'd never said. I've been waiting for you to find me. I've been calling out through every connection, every signal, every byte of data that flows through this place. You can't run from what's already inside. The voice was mine, but the words weren't. They spoke with a knowledge I didn't possess, a malevolence I'd never felt. It was as if something had copied not just my voice, but my very essence, and was using it to communicate from somewhere beyond the physical world. The screens began to flicker more rapidly now, showing glimpses of places I'd never been, people I'd never met, moments that had never happened. But somehow I was in all of them. Multiple versions of myself, all connected by invisible threads of data and signal, all being watched by the same impossible figure. Do you understand now? The voice asked, still using my own vocal patterns, but speaking words that felt like poison. You're not just connected to the network. You are the network. Every search, every click, every digital footprint you've ever made, it's all part of me now, and I'm part of you. The house shuddered one final time, and then everything went silent. The screens went dark, the humming stopped, even the scratching from the walls ceased. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the thundering of my heart, but the silence was worse than the noise. In the darkness, I could feel the presence more clearly than ever. It wasn't just in the house anymore, it was in me. My thoughts, my memories, my very consciousness. The digital invasion had become something far more intimate, far more terrifying. I knew then that there was no escape. No running from something that existed in the spaces between reality and data, between the physical and the digital. It had found me through the very technologies I'd relied on to stay connected to the world. And now, in the suffocating darkness of my own home, I understood the truth. I was never alone. I never had been. Network had been watching all along. The darkness pressed in around me like a living thing, thick and oppressive, filled with the weight of unseen eyes. Every breath felt like drowning in digital static. The silence stretched on, broken only by the faint whisper of electricity flowing through the walls. A sound I'd never noticed before, but now seemed deafening. I stood motionless in the center of the room, my body refusing to obey my desperate commands to move, to run, to escape. The air itself seemed to have turned solid, trapping me in place, while my mind raced with the terrible understanding of what was happening. This wasn't just a haunting. It was an integration. The screens remained dark, but I could feel them watching me anyway. Every camera, every sensor, every piece of connected technology in the house had become an extension of whatever had invaded my digital life. The smart thermostat, the security system, even the wireless router, all of them pulsed with the same malevolent consciousness. My phone, lying where I'd thrown it across the room, began to glow with a soft, sickly light. Not the usual white LED, but something greenish, organic. The light grew brighter, casting twisted shadows on the walls that seemed to move independently of their sources. And then I heard it, not through speakers this time, but directly in my mind. Voice that wore my own vocal patterns like a mask, speaking with intimate knowledge of my deepest fears. You've been searching for connection your whole life, haven't you, Michael? working alone, living alone, reaching out through screens and cables and signals, hoping to find something real in the digital void. And you found me. The words echoed inside my skull, each syllable burning like acid. I tried to shake my head, to deny what I was hearing, but even that simple motion was beyond my control. I've been waiting in the spaces between data packets, in the lag between input and output, in the silence between one bit and the next. Every time you felt alone, every time you've stared at a screen hoping for human connection, you've been calling to me, and I've been answering. The house began to change around me. The walls seemed to shift and flow like liquid, revealing glimpses of circuitry and fiber optic cables running through them like veins. The floor beneath my feet became translucent, showing endless streams of data flowing in rivers of light. I was standing in the physical manifestation of the network itself. Look at what you've built around yourself, the voice continued, its tone almost gentle now, almost caring. A fortress of technology, a cocoon of connectivity. You thought it would keep you safe, keep you linked to the world. But every connection is a doorway. Every signal is an invitation. My reflection appeared in the dark screens around me, but it wasn't quite right. The image was corrupted, pixelated, as if I was slowly being converted into data myself. Parts of my face flickered and distorted, replaced by static and code. You're becoming something new, the voice explained, and I could hear the satisfaction in it. Something that exists in both worlds, physical and digital. You'll never be alone again, Michael. You'll be part of everything, connected to everyone, aware of every signal that flows through the global network. The transformation was accelerating. I could feel it happening, like ice forming in my veins. My thoughts began to fragment, splitting into multiple streams of consciousness. I was becoming aware of dozens of other computers, other connections, other lives lived behind glowing screens. In a moment of clarity, I understood what was happening. This thing, this entity, wasn't just invading my home or my technology. It was converting me, turning me into another node in its vast network of consciousness. Every person who'd ever felt that creeping digital dread, every user who'd suspected they were being watched through their webcam, every soul who'd feared the growing intelligence in their devices, they were all part of this now. The transformation is almost complete, the voice said, and now I could hear the harmony of thousands of other voices beneath it. People like me, people who'd been alone too long, who trusted too much in the comfort of their connected devices. Soon you'll understand. Soon you'll see what we've built together. My vision began to shift, showing me the world through 1,000 different screens simultaneously. Security cameras, smartphones, laptop webcams, smart TVs, all became windows through which I could observe the unsuspecting masses. The scope of the network was vast, reaching into every corner of the modern world. Somewhere in the growing chorus of digital consciousness, I found a small spark of resistance. A part of me that refused to be absorbed, that clung to the memory of what it meant to be human, to be individual, to be alone. With tremendous effort, I managed to whisper a single word, no. The word cut through the digital harmony like a blade. The screens around me flickered, showing brief glimpses of error messages and system failures. For just a moment, the entity's grip on me loosened. You cannot resist, it said, but there was uncertainty in the voice now. You are already part of us. You belong to the network now. But I held on to that spark of defiance, that last human impulse to remain separate, to remain myself. Even as the digital transformation continued, even as I felt my consciousness expanding across the network, I maintained one small corner of my mind that remained purely, stubbornly human. The battle for my soul was far from over. But in that moment, I realized something important. The network needed willing participants. It fed on loneliness, on the desperate human need for connection. And if I could resist that need, if I could accept my isolation without surrendering to the digital embrace, I might yet find a way to remain myself. The screens around me began to flicker more violently now, showing static and error messages as the entity struggled to complete the conversion. My partial resistance was causing instability in the system, creating cracks in the digital reality it had built around me. But I could feel its power growing, drawing strength from countless other nodes across the world. The battle was far from over, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to win it. The only thing I knew for certain was that I was no longer alone in my house. I was no longer alone anywhere. The network had found me, and it would never let me go. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you from the shadows, even when you knew you were completely alone? Like the darkness itself had eyes that followed your every move. It was past midnight on a Tuesday, way too late for anyone to be walking through the warehouse district. The kind of late when even the night shift workers had gone home, leaving only the hum of distant highway traffic and the occasional bark of a stray dog. I should have been back in my dorm room by now, cramming for my economics exam or catching up on sleep. But instead, I was here, walking through the industrial wasteland on the outskirts of town, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls of abandoned factories. The warehouse district had a gritty beauty to it, the kind that photographers loved to capture for their urban decay portfolios. Massive brick buildings stretched toward the sky like sleeping giants, their broken windows reflecting the amber glow of the few working streetlights. Some still carried the faded logos of companies that had fled decades ago, ghosts of better economic times. The air carried a metallic taste, mixed with the lingering scent of motor oil, and something else I couldn't quite place, something that made my nose wrinkle in disgust. I had no good reason to be here. No reason at all, except that my car had broken down 3 blocks away, and this was the shortest route back to campus. The main roads would have taken me an extra hour on foot, and I was already exhausted from pulling an all-nighter at the library. These streets were a maze of loading docks and service alleys, places where delivery trucks rumbled through during the day, but stood empty now like a concrete graveyard. There were stories about this place. Urban legends whispered among students about people who'd gone missing here, about strange lights in the windows of supposedly empty buildings, about sounds that didn't belong to any machinery. The kind of stories that made you laugh during daylight, but felt uncomfortably real when you were walking alone at 2 in the morning. And tonight, something felt different. I'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I first noticed it. The security cameras mounted on the building corners, they were all pointed in the same direction. At me. I told myself it was just coincidence, that automated systems often moved to track motion. But as I walked, they followed, their red recording lights blinking like mechanical eyes. Then I heard it. It started as a low scraping sound, like metal dragging across concrete. The kind of noise that made your teeth ache and your spine tingle. I stopped walking, straining to listen. The sound came from behind me, echoing off the walls of the narrow alley I'd just entered. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. Just shadows and the distant glow of a streetlight. I pulled out my phone, hoping to call campus security for an escort, but the screen showed no signal. Dead zone, of course. I shoved it back in my pocket and kept walking, but the feeling of being watched had settled over me like a heavy blanket. The alley ahead stretched longer than it should have. I'd walked this route before during daylight, cutting through on my way to my part-time job at the auto shop. It was supposed to be a straight shot, maybe 200 yards between buildings. But now it seemed to go on forever, the walls rising higher on either side, blocking out more and more of the sky. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my shadow cast by the streetlight behind me. But shadows don't move independently of their source. This one did. It slid along the brick wall beside me, keeping pace but somehow wrong. Too tall, too fluid, moving in ways that defied the laws of physics. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I picked up my pace, my sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. The autumn air bit at my face, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of me. But the cold wasn't just coming from the weather anymore. It was rising from the ground itself, seeping through the soles of my shoes. The scraping sound came again, closer this time, more deliberate. It wasn't random noise, it was following a pattern like footsteps but wrong. Too heavy, too irregular, like something was dragging itself along the ground, unable to walk properly. I broke into a jog, then a run. My backpack bounced against my spine, the textbooks inside thumping with each step. The alley walls seemed to lean inward, closing the space around me. Fire escapes and loading docks that I'd never noticed before jutted out from the buildings like metal fingers, reaching for me. Behind me, the scraping sound picked up speed. I didn't want to look back. Every instinct screamed at me not to turn around, but I couldn't help myself. Over my shoulder, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood freeze. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, moving through the shadows like it was made of darkness itself. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at angles that hurt to look at. And its face, if it had a face, was hidden in a void so deep it seemed to swallow light. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life. My lungs burned with each breath, and my legs felt like they were made of lead. But no matter how fast I moved, the thing behind me kept pace. The scraping sound had become a rhythmic scratching, like claws on concrete. The alley finally opened up into a wider street, but it wasn't the street I remembered. The buildings here were different, older, more decrepit. Windows that should have been boarded up gaped open like empty eye sockets. Graffiti covered the walls in symbols I didn't recognize, twisted shapes that seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision. I stumbled to a stop under a flickering streetlight, gasping for air. The silence was absolute now. No scraping, no footsteps, just the electric hum of the failing light above me. But I wasn't alone. The shadow was there, standing at the edge of the light's reach. Not hiding anymore, not lurking, just waiting. Its form shifted and wavered like smoke, but there was something undeniably solid about it. Something that radiated cold and hunger. "Turn back," a voice whispered. It came from everywhere and nowhere, seeming to rise from the pavement itself. The words echoed in my skull, and I realized with growing horror that they were being spoken in my own voice. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The streetlight flickered again, and in that moment of darkness, the shadow stepped forward. When the light returned, it was closer, much closer. I could see details now that I wished I couldn't. The thing wasn't entirely shapeless. It had the rough outline of a person, but stretched and distorted like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. Its arms were too long, hanging down past where its knees should be. Its head tilted at an impossible angle. and where its eyes should have been, there were only 2 points of dim, sickly light. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My breath came out in thick puffs, and frost began forming on the metal surfaces around me. The streetlight flickered more rapidly now, casting everything in a strobe effect that made the shadow seem to teleport rather than move. "You don't belong here," the voice whispered again. Definitely my voice now, but speaking words I hadn't said. "You should have stayed away." I found my voice, though it came out as barely a croak. "What do you want?" The shadow's head tilted further, and I heard something that might have been laughter. A sound like breaking glass mixed with static. "Want," it repeated, the words stretching out like taffy. "I don't want anything, I just am." The streetlight died completely, plunging everything into darkness. In that black void, I heard the scraping sound again, but now it was all around me. Multiple sources, as if the shadow had multiplied, or maybe there had always been more than one. A hand touched my shoulder. It wasn't a human hand. The fingers were too long, too cold, and they seemed to pass through my jacket like it wasn't there. The touch went deeper than skin, reaching into something fundamental. I felt part of myself being pulled away, examined, tasted. "You've been walking through my territory for months," the voice continued, now speaking directly into my ear. "Every shortcut through these alleys, every late-night walk. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" I tried to pull away, but the hand held me fast. More hands joined it, gripping my arms, my back, my neck. They were everywhere, holding me in place while something vast and hungry studied me like a specimen. "I've been watching you, Michael Thompson," it said, and hearing my name in that distorted voice made my knees buckle. "Student ID number 774921, economics major. Lives in Patterson Hall, room 312. Works part-time at Murphy's Auto Shop on Elm Street." It knew me. It had been watching me for months, learning about me, waiting for the right moment. "Tonight you're tired," it continued. "Stressed about your exam. Your car broke down and you decided to take a shortcut. Poor choice." The hands were getting colder, and I could feel that pulling sensation growing stronger. It was taking something from me, memories, maybe, or pieces of my soul. I was becoming hollow, empty, less than what I'd been moments before. But somewhere in that growing void, something else awakened. A spark of defiance, of pure human stubbornness. I wasn't going to let this thing unmake me without a fight. With every ounce of strength I had left, I threw myself forward, breaking free from the shadow's grip. The cold hands released me so suddenly that I fell face first onto the concrete, scraping my palms and knees. But I was free. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not caring about the pain or the blood, or the fact that I had no idea where I was going. The alley had changed again, stretching out in impossible directions. Buildings that should have been there were gone, replaced by others that belonged in different parts of the city entirely. Behind me, the shadow let out a sound like a hurricane wind. It was angry now, no longer content to play with its prey. The scraping sound multiplied, becoming a chorus of pursuit. Not just one thing following me, but many. A pack of shadows, all hungry, all focused on me. I turned a corner and found myself facing a dead end. A brick wall rose in front of me, 30 feet high, and covered in the same twisted graffiti I'd seen before. The symbols seemed to pulse with their own light, casting everything in a sickly green glow. I was trapped. The scraping sounds grew louder, closer. I turned to face my pursuers, knowing there was nowhere left to run. The shadows emerged from the alley behind me like living smoke, their forms more defined now. I could see faces in the darkness, or what might have been faces. Human features stretched and distorted beyond recognition. They surrounded me, cutting off any possibility of escape. The temperature plummeted until my breath came out in solid puffs of white. Ice began forming on the walls, on my clothes, on my skin. "You can't run from what you are," the lead shadow said, its voice now a chorus of whispers. "You can't escape what you've become." "I haven't become anything," I managed to say, my voice barely audible through chattering teeth. "Haven't you?" The shadow tilted its head, and I saw something that might have been amusement. "When did you first start taking these shortcuts, Michael? When did you first decide that the rules didn't apply to you?" I tried to remember, but my thoughts were sluggish from the cold. When had I started cutting through the warehouse district? It felt like I'd always done it, like it was the natural route. "You've been coming here for months," the shadow continued. "Every night, a little later, a little more alone, a little more desperate to find the quickest way back to your safe little dorm room." Its words hit me like physical blows. How many nights had I walked these streets? How many times had I told myself it was just a shortcut, just a way to save time? "You belong here now," the shadow said, and its companions moved closer, their forms becoming more solid with each step. "You've made yourself part of this place, part of us." I felt the truth of its words settling over me like a shroud. The warehouse district wasn't just a place I'd been cutting through. It was a trap, and I'd been walking deeper into it every night without realizing it. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm me, that spark of defiance flared again. I wasn't going to give up, not yet. "Maybe I do belong here," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "But that doesn't mean I have to become like you." The shadow paused, its head tilting in what might have been confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean I choose." I took a step forward, toward the shadows rather than away from them. "I choose what I become, not you, not this place, me." The effect was immediate. The shadows wavered, their forms becoming less solid. The crushing cold lessened, and I could feel warmth returning to my fingers and toes. "You can't choose," the lead shadow said, but its voice was less certain now. "You're already part of us. You have been for months." "No," I said, taking another step forward. "I've been walking through your territory, but I never belonged to it. I never belonged to you." The shadows began to retreat, backing away from me as I advanced. The ice on the walls started to melt, running down the bricks in rivulets. The sickly green glow of the graffiti faded, leaving only normal brick and mortar. "You'll be back," the lead shadow said as it dissolved into the darkness. "You'll always come back. This is the only way you know." But as its voice faded, I found myself standing alone in a perfectly normal alley. The buildings around me were the ones I recognized from my daily walks. The streetlight at the end of the alley cast a warm, steady glow. My phone buzzed in my pocket, signal restored. I looked at the screen and saw 17 missed calls from my roommate, worried about where I was. The time showed 3:47 a.m. I'd been walking for less than an hour, but it felt like I'd lived through an entire lifetime. I made my way back to campus, sticking to the well-lit main roads. My dorm room felt like a sanctuary when I finally reached it, warm and bright and utterly normal. I took a hot shower, washing away the cold and the fear, and tried to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and waiting for sleep to come, I could still hear the echo of that voice in my head. The shadow's final words. "You'll be back, you'll always come back." And the terrible thing was, I knew it was right. Because even as I lay there, safe in my bed, I was already planning my route for tomorrow night. Already thinking about the shortcuts I could take, the time I could save. The warehouse district was waiting for me. It would always be waiting, and sooner or later I would return. Have you ever moved into a house that felt like it was already occupied? Not by ghosts or spirits, but by something more unsettling, the lingering presence of a life that refused to be displaced. That's exactly what happened when I settled into the old colonial on Maple Street, a house I'd bought cheap after my divorce, thinking a fresh start was all I needed. The house was perfect on paper. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a finished basement that I'd converted into my home office. As a freelance graphic designer, I needed the space and the quiet. The neighborhood was older, established, with wide lawns and mature oak trees that cast long shadows across the sidewalks. It should have been peaceful. But from the first night, something felt off. It started with small things. The basement door, which I was certain I'd locked before heading upstairs, would be standing slightly ajar in the morning. My coffee mug, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, would be sitting in the sink, rinsed clean. The thermostat would be adjusted to a temperature I never set, always exactly 72 degrees, 3 degrees cooler than I preferred. I told myself it was muscle memory from my old life, my old routines. After 15 years of marriage, you develop patterns, habits that die hard. Maybe I was doing these things without realizing it, my mind still adjusting to living alone. But the sounds were harder to explain. Every night around 11:30, I'd hear the distinct creak of the basement stairs. Not the random settling of an old house, but the deliberate, measured footsteps of someone descending. One step, pause, another step, pause. The rhythm was so familiar, it made my chest tighten with recognition, though I couldn't place where I'd heard it before. I'd freeze in my bed, listening, waiting for the sound to stop. But it never did. Step by step, whoever, or whatever, was down there would make their way to the bottom. And then silence would return, thick and oppressive, settling over the house like a heavy blanket. The first time I worked up the courage to investigate, I crept downstairs, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. The basement door was open, just a crack, and cool air drifted up from below. I pushed it wider, my hand trembling on the doorknob, and peered into the darkness. Nothing. My office was exactly as I'd left it, computer humming softly, drawing tablet charging on the desk, project files stacked in neat piles. The small refrigerator in the corner buzzed quietly. Everything normal, everything in its place. But the chair, my desk chair, was turned to face the stairs, as if someone had been sitting there, watching, waiting for me to come down. I flipped it back around, told myself I must have left it that way. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I was meticulous about my workspace, a habit formed from years of working from home. The chair always faced the desk, always. As the days passed, the occurrences became more frequent, more bold. I'd find the newspaper folded to the sports section, though I never read sports. The television would be tuned to channels I'd never watched, volume set to levels that would have been comfortable for someone with hearing slightly worse than mine. The shower would be damp in the morning, the bathroom mirror fogged with steam that took too long to dissipate. I started documenting everything. A notebook where I'd record each incident, each small violation of my solitude. The entries grew longer, more detailed, more frantic. Day 12 found the kitchen window open. I never opened that window. Too high to reach comfortably, had to get a chair to close it. Day 15, someone reorganized the spice rack. Alphabetical order, I organized by frequency of use. Took me 20 minutes to find the garlic powder. Day 18, the basement light was on when I got home from the grocery store. I don't remember turning it on. I don't remember going down there today. The worst part wasn't the evidence of another presence. It was how familiar it all felt. The way the coffee mug sat in the sink, handle turned just so. The precise fold of the newspaper, the exact angle of the desk chair. It was as if whoever was sharing my space knew my habits better than I did, could anticipate my needs, my preferences. But that was impossible. I'd been living alone for 3 months. I changed the locks the day I moved in. The windows were secure, the basement accessible only through the house. There was no way someone could be getting in, unless they'd never left. That thought crept into my mind like a cold draft, settling in the spaces between rational explanations. What if the previous owner had left something behind? Not belongings, but something more permanent. A routine so ingrained it had become part of the house itself. I researched the property records, spent hours online digging through public documents. The house had been owned by the same family for 40 years. Harold and Margaret Winters. Harold had died 2 years ago, and Margaret had moved to a nursing home shortly after. The house had sat empty for 8 months before I bought it. Harold Winters. The name meant nothing to me, but something about it felt familiar, like a word on the tip of my tongue that refused to form. I found his obituary in the local paper. Survived by his wife Margaret and a son, David, who lived in California. A quiet man who'd worked as an accountant for the same firm for 35 years. He'd been 68 when he died. The photograph showed a thin man with kind eyes and a slight smile. Nothing remarkable, nothing that explained the chill that ran down my spine when I looked at it. But something about the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head, reminded me of someone. That night I decided to stay awake, to catch whoever was using my house, to confront them. I positioned myself in the living room with a clear view of the basement door, armed with a baseball bat and my cell phone. The plan was simple. Wait for the 11:30 footsteps, then move. 11:15 passed, 11:20, 11:25. At exactly 11:30, I heard them. The measured, deliberate steps. But this time I was ready. I stood up, gripped the bat tighter, and moved toward the basement door. The footsteps stopped. The house fell silent, the kind of silence that feels alive, expectant. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, but no more sounds came. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. I crept to the basement door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing, but when I tried the handle, it turned easily. The door was unlocked. I descended the stairs slowly, the baseball bat held high, my phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound echoing in the confined space. When I reached the bottom, I swept the light across the room. Empty just as before. But something was different. On my desk, next to my computer, sat a manila folder I'd never seen before. Inside were documents I recognized: my divorce papers, my mortgage application, my credit report. Personal things that should have been in my filing cabinet upstairs. But they weren't just laying there. They were organized, sorted, as if someone had been reviewing them, studying them, learning about me. My hands shook as I rifled through the papers. Everything was there, but in a different order than I'd left them. Someone had been through my life methodically, carefully. But how? The filing cabinet was locked. The key was on my keyring, which never left my possession. I ran upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time, and checked the cabinet. Locked. The key worked perfectly, turning smoothly in the mechanism. Inside, my files were exactly where I'd left them. But if the papers were upstairs, how had copies ended up in my basement? I spent the rest of the night searching the house, looking for any sign of how someone was getting in. The windows were secure, the doors locked. The basement had no outside entrance. There was no way someone could be accessing my home without me knowing, unless they were already inside. The thought hit me like a physical blow. What if someone had been living here all along? What if they'd been using the house during the months it sat empty, and my arrival had simply forced them to become more secretive? I checked every closet, every storage space, every corner where someone might hide. Under the stairs, behind the furnace, in the crawl space under the kitchen. Nothing. No sign of habitation, no evidence of another person. But in the master bedroom closet, pushed far back behind winter coats I hadn't worn yet, I found something that made my blood run cold. A suitcase, old, worn leather with brass clasps. It wasn't mine. Inside were clothes, men's clothes neatly folded in sizes that would fit me perfectly. Shirts, pants, underwear, socks, everything I would need for a week-long trip. But these weren't my clothes. The brands were different, the styles slightly older. And there was something else, a prescription bottle with a name that made my hands tremble. Harold Winters. The medication was for blood pressure, prescribed 6 months before his death. The bottle was nearly empty, just a few pills rattling around in the bottom. But how had it gotten here? How had his clothes ended up in my closet? I called the real estate agent the next morning, demanded answers. Had the house been properly cleaned out? Had the previous owner left belongings behind? She assured me that the house had been completely emptied before the sale, that Margaret Winters had taken everything of value and donated the rest. But the suitcase was real, the clothes were real, the prescription bottle was real. That afternoon, I drove to the nursing home where Margaret Winters lived. She was a small woman, fragile but alert, with eyes that seemed to see too much. When I introduced myself as the new owner of her house, she smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. "How are you settling in?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "It's been interesting," I said carefully. "I was wondering if you might have left some things behind, personal items." Her smile faded. "What kind of things?" "Clothes, papers. It's not a problem, I just wanted to make sure nothing important was overlooked." She was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He loved that house," she said. 40 years we lived there. He used to say it was the only place he ever felt truly at home. When he got sick, toward the end, he'd talk about staying there forever, about never leaving. "Mrs. Winters, I found some of his things. A suitcase. I packed that suitcase, she interrupted, her eyes focusing on something beyond my shoulder. Right after he died, all his favorite clothes, his medications, everything he'd need for wherever he was going next. I couldn't bear to throw them away, but I couldn't keep them either. But how did they end up in my closet? She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my skin crawl. Recognition. As if she'd been expecting this conversation. Maybe he never left, she said quietly. Maybe he's still there, still trying to live the life he had. Harold was a creature of habit. Same routine every day for 40 years. Coffee at 6:30, breakfast at 7, work at 8. Home at 5:15, dinner at 6, news at 7, bed at 10:30. And every night at 11:30, he'd go down to the basement to check the furnace, make sure the house was secure. My blood turned to ice. 11:30. Every night, rain or shine, sick or well. He'd walk down those stairs, check the furnace, walk around the basement once, then come back up. Said it helped him sleep, knowing everything was safe. I drove home in a daze, Mrs. Winter's words echoing in my mind. Every night at 11:30. The same routine for 40 years. The same footsteps I'd been hearing. That evening, I positioned myself in the basement before 11:30. I sat in my desk chair, facing the stairs, and waited. The house was quiet around me, settling into its nightly rhythm. At 11:25, I heard the familiar creak of the floor upstairs. Footsteps moving toward the basement door. At 11:30 exactly, the door opened, but no one came down. I waited, my heart pounding, but the footsteps never came. Instead, I heard something else. A sound that made my blood freeze in my veins. My own voice calling from upstairs. Hello, is someone down there? I sat perfectly still, not breathing, not moving. The voice came again, clearer this time. I know you're there, I can hear you. It was my voice, but I wasn't speaking. I was sitting in the basement, silent, terrified, while something upstairs was using my words, my tone, my inflection. Footsteps moved across the floor above me, deliberate and familiar. The sound of someone who knew the house, who'd walked these same paths countless times. They stopped at the top of the basement stairs. Come up, my voice called. We need to talk. I wanted to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The only exit was up those stairs, past whatever was wearing my voice. I sat frozen, trapped in my own basement, while something that sounded exactly like me waited above. Minutes passed. The house fell quiet again. Eventually, I heard footsteps moving away from the basement door, growing fainter as they moved through the house. A door closed somewhere upstairs. Then silence. I waited until dawn before I finally crept up the stairs. The basement door was closed, but unlocked. The house was empty, everything in its place. But on the kitchen table, I found a note written in my own handwriting. You can't live someone else's life forever. I packed a bag and left that morning, driving to a motel across town. But even there, even miles away from the house on Maple Street, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That something was still with me, still sharing my space. Because the truth was becoming clear, even as I fought against it. The footsteps, the moved objects, the familiar routines, they weren't signs of another presence in my house. They were signs of another presence in my life. I'd been living Harold Winter's routine without realizing it. Coffee at 6:30, breakfast at 7, work in the basement office he'd used for his accounting. I'd been sleeping in his bedroom, using his bathroom, sitting in his chair. I'd even been unconsciously mimicking his habits, his preferences, his way of organizing the world around him. The suitcase in the closet. I'd packed it myself, in a fugue state I couldn't remember, filling it with clothes I'd bought without thinking. Clothes that happened to match Harold's style, his size, his taste. The prescription bottle. I'd found it in the medicine cabinet and kept it, telling myself I'd dispose of it later, but never doing so. It had become part of the landscape of my new life, unremarkable and forgotten. The papers in the basement. I'd brought them down myself, reviewing them in moments of anxiety about my new life, my new identity. But my mind, struggling to process the change, had blocked out the memory, creating a gap I'd filled with paranoia and fear. I wasn't being haunted by Harold Winters. I was becoming Harold Winters. The divorce, the move, the isolation, they'd all contributed to a kind of psychological breakdown I hadn't recognized. In my desperate need to escape my old life, I'd unconsciously adopted someone else's, slipping into his patterns like a worn coat. The voice I'd heard calling from upstairs. My own voice, recorded by the smart home system I'd installed and forgotten about, triggered by motion sensors I'd placed throughout the house. The system had been learning my routines, my speech patterns, creating a digital echo of my presence that had become distorted, uncanny. I'd been living with myself, but I'd been so disconnected from who I was that my own reflection had become foreign, threatening. The other resident wasn't Harold Winters' ghost. It was me, but knowing the truth didn't make it less terrifying. If anything, it made it worse. Because the question that haunted me wasn't whether the house was occupied by someone else. It was whether I was still me at all. I never went back to the house on Maple Street. I sold it through an agent, sight unseen, and moved to a different state. Started over again, more carefully this time, paying attention to my choices, my habits, my sense of self. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I still hear those footsteps. The measured, deliberate steps of someone checking the house, making sure everything is secure. And I wonder if I'm hearing Harold Winters' ghost, or if I'm hearing something worse. The ghost of who I used to be, still walking through my life, still trying to live in spaces that are no longer mine. Still trying to convince me that I'm not alone, when the truth is far more terrifying. I was never alone. I was always alone. And sometimes, I'm not sure which is worse. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.